The podcast you're about to hear literally finished about 10 minutes ago. I thought it was important to do the intro now because what an awesome experience I just had. And it's podcasting and sharing information and being open and honest and the journey this podcast has been on that created what you're about to listen to. Ben Bush, or Bushy, is a Mason, and he's been a Mason for 18 years. And we connected on Instagram about 6 days ago through a lot of the posts that I've been doing lately, questioning building techniques and just the knowledge that I've been sharing because I'm deep down the megalithic rabbit hole at the moment. And we connected and started chatting on Instagram, and I said, mate, do you want to come on the podcast? And we've been texting for the last few days, and we literally just sat down and recorded a 2+ hour podcast. That's so awesome. The fact that this humble little podcast has a bloke like that come on and share his thoughts and ideas, and what an excellent conversation it was. Now, he rang in from Melbourne, so I had to go old school with the XY mic, and he rang in on the mobile. I'm going to have to figure out a better way to do that. However, the signal's not real great in the studio, so I am working on that in the background. There's a lot of negative things that surround social media and the time suck and all this sort of stuff. However, it's also a tool, and it can be used in positive ways, and it can be used to connect people. And that's what's happened here. I know his mates are now listeners of the podcast. I'm going to tell my mates about this podcast, and Bushy's going to start his own podcast. And now the tribe just doubled in size because we connected through social media. I can't thank Bushy enough for coming on and sharing his thoughts, and it was excellent to get a different perspective. However, interesting that despite our obviously location differences and all the things that have separated us, we've come to the same conclusion on a lot of things. I can't really say much more. That I'm just very appreciative. I'm very humbled by everything that's happening at the moment, and it's exciting. And I hope you guys can hear that and see that and feel that, because this was like sitting down with an old mate. And all I want is for you guys to be here with us when we have these conversations. So I'm going to shut up. I'll let you guys get into this one. We're going to go with some Rowdy Strum this time, and it's going to be a mystery. I'm going to pull some other stuff out. I'm not too sure. Plain Lady Jane, not sure yet. I'll figure it out when I put it together. Enjoy Rowdy. He can be found on SoundCloud. Thanks to Jono for the intro, and you can see some of Bushy's work at Chisel and Hoe on Instagram and at Midlight Fitness on Instagram as well. Give him a follow. Top bloke. Really appreciated his time. That's it, guys. Look after yourselves. Stay safe. Be cool. And we'll talk soon. Cheers.
1, 2, 3, 4. I've seen her on the pavement, strolling in the sunshine. Her eyes were like a pool of pearls with an emerald swirl on the inside. As she passed by the hibiscus row, the colors blending with her clothes, and the only thing she wears for bling
G'day everyone. Got a new guest over the phone tonight. Ben Bush from Macedon in Melbourne, mate. How you going?
I'm very well, Triff, and thanks very much for the invitation to speak.
No worries, mate. Thank you. And this is it's quite interesting because this is we connected over Instagram a few days ago, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how these things work? So we connected over Instagram and we've been texting, and we thought we'd sit down and have a chat because you're a stonemason, mate. So you've been working with stone for how long?
Yeah, for 18 years I've been at it. This year marks 18 years. I'll provide a bit of background of how it all sort of ended up where it is. I grew up on about 4 acres out east of Melbourne in the Dandenong Ranges, and so we were real outdoor kids because we had plenty of outdoors to play with, and we were always running amok. Me and my brother, especially, we were 2 years apart. We were very hands-on kids, and always building things, and we never weren't doing any stonemasonry as kids. We always used to sort of roll.
Well, you're just messing around, mate. You would have built cubbies. I built cubbies with stones and all that sort of stuff. You would have just
exactly, yeah, cubbies like your army base, your tree house, knocking around with the old timber. I remember we had a hardware store that would give us buckets of rusted nails that had water damage and stuff. We used to go home and play all sorts of stuff with that. But I really loved. My childhood was pretty uniquely beautiful because we had these 4 acres that we played on, during the school term, and then my grandmother had the foresight to buy a block of land on the beach at Phillip Island in the very late 50s, and
oh
the
wow,
little shack on. Oh, superb, yeah. There was a shack on the beach that we used to go to at the school holidays with my mum and dad, and a lot of family members were school teachers, and so me and my cousins would, same thing, get out and about and explore the world as we could. And
my granddad had a plot at a caravan plot at Torquay that he kept for the family as well. So along that coastline, similar, mate. Yeah, it's an amazing when you're up there in the summer and messing around up there in the hills and all that sort of stuff. It's formative times.
Yeah, look, it really is, and it's interesting because it sort of gave me, in some sense, it gave me a bit of a false sense of reality because I sort of played in the bush and played in the forest during the year and played at the beach at the holidays. I had this kind of probably naive notion of what the world was as a young kid. But I started, probably typically like a lot of others in my teen years, sort of smoked a bit of pot and pondered bigger things, and had a really sort of bizarre New Year's Eve at 96. We were down at the beach house, and I took some very powerful LSD and sort of went off into all sorts of mad directions there. And at one stage of the day, just probably had a few hours there, I just couldn't. Literally, the blueprint of who I was and what I was kind of disappeared. And I sort of frantically trying to work out what was going on. But
right.
But that was also, I realised looking back on that was around about the time that I was sort of starting to, get out and see more and understand more. And I started to get sort of quite concerned around that time. I started to become more, have a greater understanding of the fragility of systems and civilizations, when put under stress. I still used to chat to my old man a lot about that sort of stuff. And
it's amazing how fragile our society actually is, mate, if you pay attention. It's,
absolutely.
We think we're so awesome and we're high and mighty. However, it's all teetering on a pinhead, realistically.
Well, I sometimes think about that. Being on the outskirts of Melbourne, I think to myself like how instantly bound up and broken Melbourne would be if you had like a truck crash and roll over on that Westgate Bridge, for example.
Yeah.
And, bank traffic up either way, and just a little simple thing like that, which might take days to unpack, and meanwhile the various supplies in and out of various goods, they're not shut down to zero, but there's enough of a blip in that.
Restricted, mate. If the truck stop, as we've spoken about, I'm in logistics, mate. So if the trucks stop coming, I think it's about your average. So your local Woolworths has got about 2 weeks worth of food in it, mate.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
After that, there's no food left at your shopping centre. So what do you do then?
Well, it's funny you mention that because I actually did around about the time that I'm talking. I was working at Stallman and Packer for Woolworths. It used to be Safeway, and I was quite fascinated in part by the fact that we had this food coming into the joint from all over the world and then going out to Victorian supermarkets, but I was also at the same time sort of questioning a lot of it. And it was around this time that my dad on the phone one day said to me that I might be interested in a design system called permaculture, which no doubt you've heard of, and
Yeah.
some of your listeners have. And so where I sort of started off in the late 90s was an interest in permaculture and reading lots of books and deciding that I'd like to sort of try and follow up a little bit of that, but that I should also probably get some sort of a trade or a vocation happening. So I got into landscaping, horticulture and landscape construction.
Yeah.
And that's how I first got into stonework. So we, trade school, we would play with blocks of stone and this and that. And around about 2002, I came up here to Central Victoria to switch employers with a guy who I'd met him at a garden show and this sort of thing, and down in Melbourne, and I knew that he needed staff, and he was putting stonework into every project that he designed, and he was a big fan of it.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of cool at the time because he come through in the 1980s, and obviously the machinery was getting used and stuff like that. But we had plenty of jobs back then where we would maybe get some pretty decent sized blocks of stone on site. We'd have to arrange them, like maybe it was a rockery garden on the embankment, or we were doing big lintels of steps up to a house or whatever. And we would muck around with, we would set down, heavy boards, like cypress planks and stuff like that, and then get some steel pipes and rollers and crowbars and do that sort of roller method. And that's where I sort of started to really appreciate early on, as just an apprentice, that moving these bits of stone, you get a piece of granite, for example, and then granite per cubic metre is about 2.6 tonnes.
Wow.
So it's it's really dense, So you get say you get a block. I did a job in the last couple of years that involved getting, I was putting some big blocks of stone around a fire circle, about a fire pit for a family, and these blocks of stone were sort of a 0.5 metre by a 0.5 metre by a metre. Punch the numbers there, and that's around about the 650, 700 kilo mark per block.
Wow.
And to get those into place, man, like I had to get a 5-ton excavator on site, and he had a grabber, and he was able to pick that thing up and move around like it was just a cup of tea. But then once he sort of got it approximately where I needed it, then it was like the heavy duty crowbar and some, just that mechanical advantage way of moving things. But that was hard yakka, that was really, really hard yakka.
And without that grabber on the back of the machine, that how are you going to move a 5.5 ton bit of stone? You know what I mean? Like that's it's fascinating.
Well, he was a 5-ton excavator, and the blocks of stone he was moving were about 650 to 700 kilos. Yeah, to clarify that. But
oh right, yeah.
Sorry, So he had a 5-ton excavator, but these blocks of stone, I worked out. I mean, he had them in place or roughed in, in about 20 minutes, let's say.
Yeah.
Now, had I had to move them from where the truck had tipped them and move them in using the planks and rollers and the crowbar and that sort of stuff, I would have been there for a good 8 or 9 hours. Just the distance I would have had to cover and how far I was going to have to move them. And there was going to be a hell of a lot of bending down and moving stuff. You've got to make sure.
A lot of manual labour to just, and how many? And so that's what, 5 blocks or something like that.
Yeah, 5 blocks. But I felt, look, with one of those jobs, I felt very confident to do it because way back, this old boss of mine we were often using machines, and we'd use jackhammers to split stone, and we'd use grinders, and we'd use all sorts of stuff like that. But he was very insistent on the hand tools and those more. I mean, we call them traditional methods. They're probably sort of more traditional, harking back to medieval Europe and stuff like that. But it was funny though, because talking, I got onto your podcast and your Instagram page because I'm majorly interested in these megalithic structures of the world.
Yes.
And
yes.
Back then, in 2002, when I was first working with this bloke, we used to sort of push a block of stone around on a roller and say, "Oh yeah, this is Egyptian style," or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Because basically, I mean, we were talking up there before the show about the various things we're taught at school, and how misguided some of those things are, and you don't have any other. You don't necessarily have any other reason to second guess. The pyramids were built with rollers and stuff like that until you actually get out there and start to move heavy blocks of stone.
Well, that's it. I mean, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to chat to you, because obviously I'm from the logistical side of things, so I was the bloke that organised the truck to get the stone to you, you know, so it's been,
Exactly.
you know, however, how do you put it in place? You know, it's like, so how big, what do you reckon the biggest stone is you've worked with, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, we did a project a couple of years ago with some really big blocks of granite. It was actually kind of this very strange shape. So they were about 4 metres long and about a half metre deep, and I'm thinking they're probably about 400 metres thick. And we were putting them in place one behind the other on an embankment to be used as steps.
Yeah.
So I haven't really done the maths on that, but that's getting up. That's easily a ton.
Easily
and really
a ton,
long,
yeah.
really long and awkward.
Yeah, well, yeah,
So
it's less about the weight at that length and more about how the size, you know.
Yeah, that's right. And these were sort of rough cut quarried ones as well. So you're not sort of dealing with anything too perfectly flat.
Mm.
You know, you put them in place and you sort of pitch a line along the edge to give it some sort of
Yeah, to give it some
reference
sort
to
of,
the eye to pick up. You know.
yeah.
But I'm thinking, yeah, that's probably about the heaviest that I've personally played with. I've certainly, I've been up to the quarry near here in Harcourt where a lot of the granite comes from, and they pull some major chunks of rock out of there. I mean, if we take a step back, I mean, the logistics aspect of what you're talking about is interesting because, you know, what we're discussing construction, and none of these things. One of the things that I really love about Graham Hancock, and I'm sure you know you're familiar with him, many of your listeners will be familiar with Graham Hancock.
Yeah.
He discusses the notion that if you go with the traditional Egyptology version of how the pyramids were made, they seemingly kind of just sprung up out of nowhere.
They just
That
appear,
one day-
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Just one day, a whole group of people who were depicted as wearing loincloth and having, you know, pretty basic rudimentary tools. Suddenly they woke up and built the largest, most complicated, most perfect structure that we know about.
And we
Just
did,
like
and one of our better early episodes is actually megalith logistics, and we looked at the Great Pyramid from that, and it was something like, if I can't remember the numbers now, it's in the catalogue, guys, for those that want to have a listen. How it was like, if it was built in 20 years, the Great Pyramid alone, I think they were laying a stone block every 45 seconds or something like that.
That's right. Yeah. There's 2.3 million blocks of stone and 6 million tons of what. Well, this is the thing. So we look at you know, I'm dealing with you know, purchasing the stone and splitting it on site and doing all these things. Your logistics. So even the fact that I can make a very easy phone call now, and I can arrange to have, you know, a 2 cubic metre block of granite delivered to a job site if I wanted such things to happen. Now that's 2 cubic metres, 2 times 2.6 tonne, it's 5.2 tonnes of stone.
Yeah.
So that means that at your end, you've had to arrange the truck that can do that. Now that's not a standard truck, I imagine.
No, so it depends on how it's weighted. You know what I mean? Whether you're going to put it over, because like you would probably notice that when you order stone, when it arrives on the truck, the big pieces aren't generally in the middle of the trailer because it'll bow the trailer. You want the heavier stuff over the drive axles, and that's sort of how you set it up. A standard prime mover, 40-foot trailer, you're looking at about 20 tonne that it's capable. That trailer is capable of, but you're looking, that's evenly spread across the deck.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of the time when I order stone, it's in much smaller blocks and it's coming out of and I'll get to the quarrying process in a bit, but the thing that fascinates me at your end in logistics, so I'm talking about my current capacity here in 2020 to make a phone call on this magical bloody iPhone to a quarry, arrange the stone, arrange the truck, all that sort of stuff. But this hasn't happened in isolation. It's not like this just happened this year. This is, 120 years, let's say, of automotive history, and prior to that we had you know, steam trains and drays and stuff like that. So everything that I can do today, if I need to do it, has come through this sort of slow grind and progression and working out how to distribute weight and working out how to build a motor that can pull a truck that empty weight 5, all that sort of stuff. And that's the fascinating thing, I think, when we start to look at these megaliths from around the world is
how.
We look at them now and you kind of get, like, some of the stuff, most of the stuff, let's just say it, most of the stuff you look at Baalbek in Lebanon, you look at the Great Pyramids in Egypt, you look at the stuff in Bolivia and in Peru, like all over the world, there's megalithic walls on Easter Island that look like the ones in Peru. There's every place you go.
Yeah,
there's these blocks of stones. And
Bolivia, Eastern Europe, like when you start digging into it, it's literally every single continent on the planet, literally. Yeah,
everywhere. Yeah, Indonesia, everywhere you go. What's the big quarry in China?
Well, there's a whole province in China that's got 1,000 pyramids in it. You know, a lot of them are covered in earth and used as like terraces for farming. However, they've got their own pyramids. India, what about India, mate? You talk about dealing with stone. They quarried. There's that temple in India that has literally been quarried into a mountain, and it's
the Ellora Caves.
Yeah, it's like a single piece, but it's like a temple that's been carved out of the mountain. You know. And like it's supposedly hammer and chisel. You know what I mean? Like, are you serious? Like, can we step back for a second and just ask a few questions?
Exactly. Well, look, we went to India in 2005, and this was when I was really, because once I got into working with stone, like I geeked out on it. I would go through books from all over the world from masons who were their reference point was predominantly, the pioneer architecture of the United States or the cathedral architecture in Europe and things like that. And,
would it be coming from the building the castles as well?
Yeah, that's right. Castles, forts, a lot of even the Roman aqueduct, things like that. I used to sort of pawn over pictures of those in books and stuff. And if I'm really honest, near where I live, you got the little town of Malmesbury here. And they've got the viaduct, which is a 5-arch basalt bridge, which is an unbelievably beautiful piece of work. But when I look at that, and when I look at these old, stately homes or pioneer homes in parts of the US, and I used to read a lot of stuff by a bloke called Charles McRaven, who was a very good mason. And then I look at the cathedrals of Europe from the cathedral era, and I've pored over many, many photos of that. I'm yet to visit some of these places, but it's certainly on the list. Even the Taj Mahal, which I did visit. Yeah. And I look at that and I go, well, I can actually kind of make sense of it. Like I can look at it and go, okay, well, that there, and the marble's polished, but I kind of vaguely know how that was done 350 years ago. And there's records, there was people who lay witness to it, kept records, all these sorts of things with a lot of these structures. And look, I don't know. The Taj Mahal is still incredible. I don't know how much of the records on that are perfectly accurate, but whatever has happened there, they've done incredible work.
But the precision of the Taj Mahal is one of the things that gets me. Like, it's perfectly square and all that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, there's precision in the Taj Mahal. I mean, so from a mason's point of view, we'll talk about the Taj Mahal because the Great Pyramid is just a big what the fuck. However, we can talk about the Taj Mahal. Do you think we could reconstruct that today? Easily, or
I think we could. I think we could with the will to do so, because you can drive through the city and see the types of cranes that lift tilt slabs up into skyscrapers could certainly manage the Taj Mahal. Yeah. And in terms of the polishing, because one of the things, I think I sent you a video the other day of the CNC machine.
I did. That was amazing. Yeah.
And look, to be honest, I think if we were going to replicate something like the Taj Mahal today, we'd be pretty foolish to not rely on
heavily on technology.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so the tech around stonework at the moment is quite incredible. I buy some materials quite often from a place in Castlemaine here called Pyrenees Quarries, and they have water-fed wire saws and these gigantic blades that are coming down and cutting blocks of raw quarried stone and then they can polish it, and there's all this stuff. So, yeah, absolutely. The Taj Mahal, I don't think, would challenge our abilities today.
Interesting, though, what the word that caught me when you answered that was the will to do so.
Yeah.
I don't know whether we would build a structure like that as a place of worship. Even those old cathedrals, religion's a completely different topic. However, I can appreciate the building. There's some beautiful ones here in the city of Brisbane and obviously in Victoria as well. And just the quality of the work and all that sort of stuff is sublime. However, would we even do that today is another question, because we would use precast and prefab and all that. You know what I mean? There's a whole range of things that we would use today instead of just block on block. And I think with some of these big projects that like these cathedrals and stuff, and you know yourself, they were generations. That would take hundreds of years to complete. The guy that started you know, his son's son would finish that. You know, like that they would train each other up to finish it. And I know that the stained glass in some of those old cathedrals in Europe, they can't replicate, I'm pretty sure. Like, however
I've heard that as well.
However they did that, they don't know, because it like refracts light and all this sort of stuff, you know?
Yeah, that's right. I've heard that as well. I think I might have heard that through Randall Carlson or one of those sort of sources. But yeah, there's did you ever read a book? There's the work of fiction by a guy named Ken Follett, and he wrote a book called The Pillars of the Earth. It was a work of fiction, but it was sort of set to the backdrop of true historical events.
Yeah, and I think back in the day, it's not in my bookcase at the moment. However, it rings a bell, but I couldn't tell you exactly what it was about.
Well, it was effectively about a fellow who sets out to build a cathedral, and I get a little bit blurred now, but they did a telemovie series of it on the BBC, so I get a little bit blurred between the book and the telemovie. But it's basically a fellow who, you know, the way this book describes, he effectively invents Gothic architecture.
Yeah.
You know, and so he goes about building this cathedral. And the book's got some quite good descriptions in there of some of the work and some of the craft and things like that. And, you know, going out at sunrise on the equinox to put a staff in the ground.
Yeah, to get your alignment right. Yeah.
That's right, cast true east and things like that. But yeah, those cathedrals, I don't think that the will would necessarily. I think in terms of building a cathedral these days, because religion isn't the same thing it used to be.
No, that's
you know, and you've got these funny. In fact, in some ways, religion's almost become a parody, because you've got these mega churches which, you know, are almost like an arena show now. You know, if you went to go and see...
Well, they are in America. It is. They literally hire out arenas to do this stuff, yeah.
That's right, yeah. So it's sort of... Because, you know, it's funny, isn't it? Because there's always that thing about, you know, according to the Bible, Jesus was kind of, you know, like, you know, don't worship me. And, you know, if he was around today, he kind of go, what the hell are you going to build this cathedral for? But if he was around today, I should say...
I'm also pretty sure we're on a slippery slope. However, I'm also pretty sure that if he was around, he wouldn't want his symbol to be him hanging on a cross bleeding, just for the record.
That's right. That's the late great Bill Hicks had that thing.
Yeah.
If he comes back, he doesn't want to see a cross around.
Yeah, exactly. Like, thanks very much for that. That was that was pretty terrible, and that's not what I was about. So, you know, thanks very much.
Yeah, you can just imagine that poor bloke. He's sitting there in his carpentry workshop, and these guys show up and say, we have 3 crucifixes. He goes, what are they for? They go, need to know basis.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is there's a lot of evidence to suggest it wasn't a crucifix; it was a T. However, yeah, we're on a slippery slope. Let's pull back on let's pull back on track.
Yeah.
So
let's pull back.
So you look at. I'm interested in what you see when you look at those cathedrals, because obviously, I mean, I understand that in an archway there's a keystone, in some walls there's a keystone that basically you pull that thing out and the whole lot's going to come down.
Yeah.
However, let's go to the Great Pyramid, because you've just said, you know, the biggest blocks you work with, you know, you can get, you know, 2.5 tons worth of stone. You've seen some big blocks, but in the pyramid itself, the stones are between 2 and 50 tons.
I'm led to believe that there's the blocks of Aswan granite in the resonance chamber of the King's Chamber up to 70 tons.
Yeah, you could be right there. And they're single pieces. They're single pieces that are like 20 or 30 metres long.
Yeah, and they've come from 500 miles away.
Yes.
Yeah. So, as I said before, if I look at cathedrals and even the Taj Mahal and things like that, I can kind of make sense of it.
Yeah.
And even a hell of a lot of the construction I saw in Cambodia around Angkor Wat and all the temples and things there, I can make sense of it because of the size and so forth. And
the individual stone, you can actually see the stones in the wall, so, you know.
That's right. Yeah, I can make sense of that in my mind and go, okay, well, with a team of people and some equipment, all sorts, I know how that can get done. I look at the Great Pyramids and I look at the triathlons in Baalbek.
Oh yeah.
And I look at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, and so far I'm just talking about photographs that I've seen, and I've spent many accumulated weeks or months really looking over and zooming in and trying to work these things, and I only have more questions.
That's the thing about this. That's the thing about this. I don't think. I reckon I've had 1,000 times. The more, and I'm deep in the rabbit hole. You know, I think that's why we get along. You're pretty deep in the rabbit hole as well, by the sounds of things.
Yeah.
And the deeper you get, it's not like you get more answers. You get
more questions.
There's just more questions. It's like,
yeah.
You know, and the thing is, like, talking to a bloke like yourself who's a stonemason, I'm from logistics. You know, I've had mates that are that have built roads. You know, I've got people that have got some skill sets that if we all got together, we could do something. You know, however,
that's right. But we couldn't do that something.
No, not that something. You know, like how do you even contemplate that sort of something? And the trilithian, I always mess it up, but the stones in Baalbek, the trilithian stones, and don't forget there's 9 of those. It's not just 3. There's 9 that are crisscrossed on top of each other.
There's 7 stones that sit underneath the 3 big ones, isn't there? And I think those 7 stones all weigh 400 tons each.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
The big ones are about 900 to 1,000 tons each.
Yeah.
And they quarry a mile away.
Yeah, and they put it on top of a hill that was like 100 foot high or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's only the last couple of years that I've come to know about the triathlon. Christ, I mean, we go deep down the rabbit hole here. Have you ever? So I know that the Romans can't move 900 tons.
Definitely.
And in fact, I don't think the Romans ever laid claim to it. I think it was probably one of those things that lost in the sands of time.
Well, it's an interesting thing, right? So you think about the Romans, all right? So the Romans were essentially the Trojans. The Trojans were who? That's a deeper question. However, apparently, you know, they built the wall, the Trojan Wall, and obviously the Roman architecture, the accuracy and all that sort of stuff is very challenging to replicate today.
Yes.
However, before the Romans pulled on the Catholic jackboot and took over the world, well, they had taken over the world at that time, but before that, they honoured the old gods of whatever province and stuff they were in. And there was many temples in Rome and throughout Italy and all their provinces. And that temple, and they were known for building new temples on top of old sites.
That's right, yes.
So, you know, and they marched into the desert to this magical place and built a temple on top of it. And I think you're right. I don't think the Romans in their history have ever laid claim to putting those big stones down. Because
there's a very good YouTube channel, you might have heard of it, you might not. It's called Bright Insight. And it's a young fella, a young American guy. It's actually like a return. He did some time in the Middle East in the military, and he saw a hell of a lot of stuff over there. Some of which has since been destroyed by ISIS, but some of the old statuary and things like that. But he did a great thing on the trilithon stones, and I think in his video he mentioned that the Romans only ever really laid claim to being able to move up to about 9 or 10 ton blocks.
Yeah.
And so.
I mean, they did have the wheel. They did have pulleys to a certain degree. You know, they did have that technology. Yeah.
But you only need to stop and like I'm sitting in my car at the moment, out in the driveway. And I think this car's about 2 ton. And I mean, if this handbrake comes off, you know, it's going to go rolling down the hill and do some damage. So I'm in a 2 ton vehicle. So 200 of these in one of the smaller blocks of the triathlon. 450 of these in the big blocks.
Not to mention the stone of the pregnant woman, which is already cut and ready to go, and I think comes in at 1,200 tons or something like that.
Exactly. So 600, the weight of 600 cars.
Yeah, you can't even And the thing about Baalbek as well that gets me, and you know, you can't put a slip of paper between those stones.
No, that's right.
Like you said before, like you use machinery to get the stones into place. However, you're using bars and chisels and stuff to put it in that final spot. how big's the crowbar you got to use to just move the 1,000-ton block that way about 5 mil, please, mate.
Yeah, that's it's exactly like none of it makes sense. That's the thing. But Lee, I was going to do a deep dive on it just before. But have you ever sort of gone down that rabbit hole that the Smithsonian Institute has bones of giants? Like in the 1800s, there was these occasional bones showing up that looked like they were giant humans.
Yes, that's something that is something that repeats itself over time, isn't it? And I haven't put considerable time into the giants, but I have read the articles. I haven't dove into it. Yeah.
So in my when I get to that point where I can't conceptualize anything that seems sensible or reasonable anymore, then I'll start to go into the next phase.
Right.
And I go, okay, could giants, let's say they stood 30 feet high instead of 6 feet high,
right?
Could a team of giants potentially cut and move that weight? And even then, you start to go, well, maybe probably not.
No, not
probably not.
And look, we did talk about this on text the other day. However, the issue we have is that we come from a mechanical existence, so we look at things as the lever because that's what we understand, and the wheel. And when you look at the stones at Baalbek, and you look at the stones in the King's Chamber, and you look at some of the stuff the Aztecs built, some of the stuff the Mayans built, Sacsayhuaman and Peru and the melted stone walls, and you look at that and go, well, we've got to step back from our hubris a little bit. And it's interesting because we look at things mechanically. However, when we first came up with steam engines and hydraulics, there's medical textbooks from the time that describe the brain as like a hydraulic pump, right? So that we apply the highest knowledge that we have to our understanding, and it's like, and we're sort of afraid of things we don't understand, and part of this process in the podcast that we've been going through is, my theory is, and we can talk about what our theories are, because that's the reality, right? So the ramp theory for the Great Pyramid, I did the numbers on that, and the ramp would actually be bigger than the pyramid itself.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, right? Just to have a slope that was shallow enough that it would make sense to push 2-ton blocks up at 2.3 million tons.
Yeah, exactly. The ramp would be bigger than the pyramid itself. And we always think about the Great Pyramid and forget that I think there's like 20 pyramids along the Nile River.
That's right. Well, that what they call the Great Pyramid, but there's not like the Great Pyramids.
Yes.
That I think, you're right. I think there's something between sort of a dozen and 20 major ones, and then the far more sort of, you call them insignificant ones for want of a better word, but there's much smaller ones. But those three main ones that we always see in the postcards and so forth.
I mean, each of those three pyramids has a range of blocks from 2 to 50 tons.
That's right, yeah.
The Great Pyramid's obviously perfect in every way, almost. Like, we can't... Can you concur that we couldn't replicate the Great Pyramid today? Obviously from a building and logistical sense, but even its accuracy. Because you said that on text the other day, I wanted to ask you this, and this applies to Baalbek and all these amazing ones, that the perfectly square-cut stones. You sort of mentioned the other day that I wanted to dig into how they got the surface flat, like how they cut them so perfectly is also a big question, and you just elaborate on that. I mean, how flat can you get a surface of a stone, say a piece of granite or limestone or something like that?
Look, that's a really good question, and that's one of those questions, that you don't stop to think about until you think about it, and then it's all you think about it. It's a bit like, have you ever heard that old proverb about two fish meet in the ocean? One of them says, "Oh, what do you think of the water?" And the other one says, "What's water?"
Yeah.
And so if I could, I think I put you onto this podcast relatively recently. I would love to recommend the Brothers of the Serpent.
Yes, definitely. Yep.
That's fantastic podcast.
That's a bit of gold. Anyone that listens to this podcast, guys, you'll love them. Randall Carlson's been on. All these guys have been on. I've listened to
Yeah,
3 or 4 since Bushy put me onto it. So it's
Well,
good
those
stuff.
guys, they do a podcast. They help Randall Carlson with his podcast as well. So, but there's a fella named Christopher Dunn, and he's written 2 books. One's
Yes.
called The Giza Power Plant,
Yep.
and the other one's called Lost Ancient Technologies of Egypt. Now, this guy comes from a background of being a production and manufacturing engineer of 50 years.
Yes. I like Chris Dunn. I do. He's got some quality work. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've got a couple of his books on the way, but I can't remember if it was him or a different guest, but they did an episode on that podcast called A History of Precision. And I think it was that one where they actually just talked about what's involved in creating flatness. So a friend of mine, I'll give a quick shout out to Grubby. He's going to probably listen to this once it's done. And him and I are balls deep down these rabbit holes about megaliths and ancient tech.
Yeah.
Now he's a boilermaker by trade, and he used to work in a workshop.
That's another interesting perspective. Yeah, very, very.
Oh,
interesting.
absolutely. So he worked in a shop, in a warehouse, and they had a set out table in the middle of the room. And that set out, these things are really expensive to buy because these things are dead flat.
Yeah, dead level. I've seen them before. Yeah.
So you know the one.
Yep.
So they're dead flat, but they're not dead flat once the room or the ambient temperature of the day heats up past a certain point. So he said that there would be days, I think it might have been 30 degrees, 32 degrees. If it got hotter than 32 degrees outdoors, you couldn't use this table because it was no longer dead flat. So
Isn't that crazy? I'm curious. My next question would be, how far out did it get depending on the heat and stuff? That'd be an interesting thing.
Well, that's it. Look, and there's another mate of mine who works. He was manufacturing dynos for a while, dynamometers.
Yeah.
And they were using. He had what he called a measuring device that measured the accuracy of the factory's measuring devices. And I think that went to two decimal places of a mil, because some of the stuff they had to machine had to be so just tight. So let's say, for example, if I'm cutting stone on a job site using just my brick saw, which is water fed, and it's got a hardened diamond encrusted blade.
Yeah.
That blade, if it cuts through just say a 20 to 30 mil granite tile, it's a very, very neat cut, very straight, but not perfectly flat by any means. As soon as I need to cut deeper, let's say I want to cut say 100 mil through a block of stone, you start to get a bit of movement. The stone's not perfectly still. The
blade's wobbling in the machine, obviously mounting of the machine, all that sort of stuff comes into play.
All of it. Getting a flat surface is unbelievably difficult to do with granite. So you do your best. I mean, I've never had to do anything to such an accuracy that it mattered. One of the things about the pyramid when I look at it is not just, so if you go up to any brick wall, let's just say you go up to the brick wall of a house, where it's all those bricks are the same size within a mil or so.
Yep.
And your mortar joins are all everything's set out to work. But you're never going to find a perfect brick wall. You'll be looking at it from time to time, you'll find one that's slightly kinked, this or that. As good as a bricky is, not every brick. So even when we're good at repetition, we're rarely perfect at repetition. So the thing that knocks my socks off when I look at images of the Great Pyramid, and this is one of the things I love most about it, because we are looking at the foundation of the structure with all those casing stones that come away.
Yes.
But all of those blocks, the repetition. Okay, I mean, you know yourself, if you've got to do something repetitive, you get bored.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh, fuck, that'll do. But there's no that'll do in that pyramid.
And absolutely. And when you talk about, we did this in the logistics one, take the stones off the pyramid. Don't forget you've got to dig into, I think it's marble or limestone to dig the tunnels underneath. So they do that first. So they dug into hard limestone. But then the base of the pyramid, it's like 61 acres, and it's.
I think it's 13 acres the main pyramid, but I think all of them together take up about something like 60 acres. Yeah.
Is it? Oh, okay, yeah. It's been a while. I did a podcast on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No.
However, the base of the Great Pyramid, I think, is plus or minus 5 degrees of being perfectly level.
Yeah.
So how did so before you even put a stone down, they've made that entire base perfectly level.
Yeah, with copper chisels.
Yeah, with copper chisels and one steel chisel that they found.
Yeah, that's right. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Chisel. Yeah, everyone's constantly trying to grab it when such.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and the other one is too. It's like I think when you start looking at logistics and as you say, quality of masonry, all that sort of stuff. Slaves did not build that. That is people.
No, fuck no.
That is people at the top of their game that are dedicated to their craft. Because as you say, you're not just placing. You're right. When you get repetitive, it gets bored. You're not just placing 100 stones. You're placing 2.3 million stones.
2.3 million stones.
And every single one is perfect.
Yeah. If you were telling this as a story, and if this was a story about a thing that didn't actually exist over in Africa, in Egypt,
Yeah.
if this was just a story you were making up for your kids at night before they went to sleep,
Yeah.
they would be right to sit there and go, "Come on, Dad, that's bullshit.
Yeah, that's bullshit, mate. You know,
Don't be ridiculous."
yeah. You know, I mean,
Well, that's many years ago, before I knew who he was, I picked up. Actually, this is a great indicator. I picked up a book by Zahi Hawass before I knew who he was.
right.
Probably about 12 years ago, and it was in a discount bin for about $4.
No surprise there.
Yeah, probably $2 too much as well. But I didn't even finish it because it was just sort of trash. But he did mention in there. He said, this was not slaves that built the pyramid. This was a population who so loved their pharaoh, sun god representatives that they were willing to do this as a society. Now, John Anthony West had this great quote, and I can't remember. I saw it recently. It might have been a YouTube video or something I was watching, and he says, of all the stories that surround the Great Pyramid, the most ridiculous one is the one that mainstream archaeologists peddle. That is, that it was built as a tomb for pharaohs by slaves and the citizens, of Egypt.
Yeah.
So if you go down that path, I was thinking about this a bit today. If you go down that path, you kind of automatically talk yourself into a dead end. So people love to say things like, look, back in the old days, they weren't under the pressures of finance and money and having to beat a schedule, so they could take their time. And people had much simpler lives back then, and da-da-da-da. So that means, let's get this straight, that means a pharaoh comes along who's planning to die soon, and he says to these people who have much simpler, easygoing lives, I'd like you all to come and build me the most complicated, most perfect structure ever done.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah, get after it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Come and get after it. So you're saying that these people who lead these beautiful, simple lives are going to give up their beautiful, simple lives to toil 10 or 12 hours a day in the blazing sun to make a pyramid.
Yeah.
And they've never done anything like this before. So if that's the case, they love this guy, so they're going to do it. Or the other thing might be, he's a tyrannical dictator, so he's going to force these people under the whip to do this thing. You're not going to get your best work under the whip.
No, you never do. You never do. You never do. That's
you never do. And in the end, you're just going to have a whole bunch of people stand up and go, you know what, fuck you, we're not doing it.
Yeah.
So you automatically talk yourself out of, you're in a dead end. As soon as you go down that line of reasoning, you're in a dead end because it just doesn't work. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't work either way.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree, mate. I totally agree. And I've thought that from the start. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. I recently, because I worry about books with all the technology, and so I've kept a lot of books, and I found some of my old books the other day, and there was this pyramid book on Egypt, and it's literally got, the covers are falling off it. I read it that many times as a kid. And, and it's like, you can't, there's no way. And it was never a tomb. That symbol that was found was graffiti by one of the early archaeologists. Like, that's...
Yeah.
And even archaeology, this is something I talked to Richard Patterson about, archaeology in its true sense is less than 100 years old. So...
Yeah, that's it.
To pretend that we actually know is a fallacy. Like, and if you can grab... and look, obviously I think as time passes and with the rise of the internet and, connecting blokes like ourselves and we're all sharing our ideas and using it for positive stuff, you can pretty much, anyone that's got half a brain, you drag them off the street and say, slaves built that pyramid, they're like, I don't think so. Like,
no.
you can't, and its alignment, I think it's like 1 in 3 billion chance that it was going to be put on the geographical centre of the Earth.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's the other. And there's all these other sort of lines that traverse through that and through these other megalithic structures. And that there's, I think you posted this even, that the floor plan of the 3 main pyramids at Giza match to the Orion constellation, but then so do pyramid complexes in other parts of the world.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, China and South America was the example that I posted online.
That's right. Yeah, it's all copper chisels.
It's all copper chisels and lots of blokes in loincloths.
Yeah. So have you explored that idea, that power plant idea as a concept?
So obviously, I like Chris Dunn. I love his work. I haven't read his books yet. They're on the list. I've got a list of about 100 books that I need to read.
Yeah. Same.
However, I've listened. Fortunately, he's been very generous with his time, and he's done quite a lot of podcasts. So I've listened to him a lot, podcasts, and the power plant. So there's a couple of things to the power plant idea. One is that and there's a pretty cool series on Netflix, which was about Egypt. It was like 7 episodes long, and
I know. I've seen them all. They're brilliant.
Yeah, and there was one. I think it was the first episode or the second episode, where this lady is standing inside a pyramid that looks like it's exploded from inside.
That's right.
And there's all the burnt stones and all that sort of stuff actually inside it. And you don't hear boo about that in this conversation.
Mm-mm.
So, it's an interesting concept. And one of the things about it, right? So let's imagine the Great Pyramid. Obviously, you'd understand that it's 8-sided, not 4-sided.
Yes, that's right.
So you put the casing stones on there. I think it would actually be very prominently 8-sided as opposed to just at the right angle, because it was built. Obviously, you'd understand that better than most. They built it on that angle from the base, but when you put the finishing stones on it, you're going to sharpen that up. You're going to bring that into a fine point. And so theoretically, the capstone of the Great Pyramid is a gold piece with a diamond, a jewel inside it, which is put into a point. That's the main thing you hear about the capstone, which is lost to the sands of time. So if you think about the winter summer solstices, you think about that time of year specifically, and the north, east, west, south, even just the rising sun, east, west, you think about refraction of light. It's going to focus the light up that point into the pyramid, into the capstone, and it's going to project light. Okay.
Yep.
So it was producing and there is electromagnetic fields coming out of the top of the pyramid. There is some form of energy that is going out of the pyramid, and so they were used for something. And the only text that we have that say what it was used for was it used to transmit consciousness from the Earth to the stars.
Yep.
Now, I think they generated power. The post that I know you were looking at the other day, where I've talked about how did they light the inside of these things, which has led me down a Baghdad battery rabbit hole, which is coming on the list of topics in the future.
That's interesting in itself, isn't it? There's no soot or
no
indication of torches or flame or anything. Yeah.
No. So how did they see in the middle of a pyramid surrounded by rock? That's a different question altogether. However, the far out theory, and one of the original unlocking the code theories, is that the Ark of the Covenant used to power the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, no, you were saying that the other day. No, expand on that, because it's again, one of the things is when you talk about Giza Pyramid as a power plant, it's very difficult to not let go of your modern mechanical mindset of what a power plant does and how a power plant makes and generates electricity. So expand on what you're talking about.
Okay, so the Ark of the Covenant. We've all seen Indiana Jones, right?
Yeah. Face melting joy.
Yeah. However, the depiction of the Ark of the Covenant in that movie, Steven Spielberg's a genius, because he actually read the text, and that, anything you see in the early biblical texts and all that sort of stuff, that's how it's depicted. It's like there's a massive energy or light coming from it, and theoretically, it's what sustained the Jews in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, when they marched across the desert. and that was part of the things. They took the ark with them, and that gave them food and energy and all that sort of stuff. However, Graham Hancock, one of his early books, that's escaping my mind, The Sign and the Seal, maybe, I can't remember, but it's about the Ark of the Covenant, and it's one of his first books, and he was in, I think could be Cambodia or it's somewhere around there, where technically the Ark resides, and it resides in a church, and you can't get past the door. But these priests, they wear heavy chains of different types of metal, lead and stuff like that, and they end up dying of like a weird sort of like radioactive cancer, and no one's allowed in or out.
Jesus. Yeah, right.
So
Okay.
the reason I put the two together is the king's sarcophagus in the chamber, which is a solid piece of red granite that would have had to be put in place and then built around it. Like, there's no tunnel that they can fit it through or anything else like that.
That's right. Yeah, and it's perfect.
It's perfect. And how you carve that out, that's a whole different story that I'm sure you could wax lyrical on. However, the dimensions of the inside of the sarcophagus, the supposed dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant are not that far off. It would fit inside it.
Yeah, right.
Okay, and I actually did the numbers. It's part of one of the Megalithic Mystery podcasts that we did earlier in the day, where I sort of expanded on this for like 10 minutes at the end of one of the podcasts, just as a bit of a muck around. However, the other thing was that sort of added fuel to the fire was like, so the idea is that was it Moses freed the slaves, stole the ark, and took off across the desert, right? And apparently the Egyptians chased them down for 40 days, and they chase them across the desert forever. Now, if your slaves escape, think about this logically, right? Your slaves escape, there's an uprising. Are you going to try and get your slaves back once they run away? Probably for a little while. You might chase them for a couple of days and see what you can get back. However, you're not going to chase them relentlessly across the desert. Right?
Not so much.
Right? They've obviously stolen something that is of great significance.
Yes.
And if they took off with the power source of your civilization, a one-off, right? That's probably a reason to chase them across the desert for 40 days.
Yep.
It's...
Yeah.
And look, it was more the fact that it fit. It was more the fact that it's known as a great power source, and the work of Graham Hancock, it just sort of like it sort of fitted. And one of the things I am learning about at the moment is that there's a lot of what is being described as keystones that are taken from these sites that potentially activate them. And there's evidence to suggest, obviously, Indigenous Australia, that I'm deep in the rabbit hole at the moment. However, I know there's sites in Cambodia where they've taken the stone away, and the temple's still there, but the temple doesn't essentially work now because they took the stone and they've hidden it. It's gone. No one's seen it for thousands of years. So there's these, I don't know, they made a crystal. That's the common story as well. We don't understand crystal, I don't think, as much as we would like. And the woo-woo connotation's taken it in a different direction. However, the reality is the first radios, your watch, all the first power systems run on quartz crystal.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's a real shame. It's one of those. I know Randall Carlson often mentions the woo-woo thing, and it is very frustrating. That a thing gets adopted. Like the hippie with their crystals, and they're wearing it around their neck while they're chugging down, rollies all day, going, "Oh, this crystal will protect me from cancer." And it's like, getting off the smokes might help too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's the funny woo-woo thing. That's I think there's a few things that you try to break out of to make sense of some of these stories and to make sense of these megaliths. Like, you've got to break free of the mechanical minds that and that's a struggle. You've got to be able to look at. You've got to somehow look at something through a lens you sort of don't have.
That's right. You really do. You've got to be very, very open. I mean, so is there any more you want to talk about? Because what we'll do is we'll go far afield. But is there any more you want to discuss about conventional stone masonry as far as the megaliths go before we sort of discuss? Because I'd love to hear what you think it is. I've got my own theories and reasons why. However, Is there
Oh,
anything?
well, megalithic. Well, I mean, I guess the other. So we touched a bit on Baalbek and we touched a little bit on the pyramids, and that's two places I'd obviously love to visit. But then there's two others that really sort of spring up a lot. One is Pumapunka in
Yeah.
Bolivia,
Yeah.
where you've got those perfectly square cut stones that are all sort of laid out, which I'd love to get to that place and just sort of have a look at the surfaces of those things to just sort of see how perfectly flat they are. But the square corners on them, again, it's not proper chisel stuff. You can cut square edges very, very slowly and carefully with very, very sharp, tungsten carbide tipped chisels. But you're probably not going to get it really big and perfect and long and thorough. I always look at those things and I think of sort of blades and CNC machines or some sort of Dremel.
Is there a percentage of hand finishing as well that gets you that final degree, I suppose, or is it always just off? You know what I mean? It's never 90
you can.
degrees.
I'd like to know how some of the, like when I in the past, one of the things I did was benchtop, granite, marble, benchtops and vanities and things like that, which, you've got to cut the edges to the size of that's required and then match the polish to the top, because the top's obviously pre-polished and you polish the edges. You go through a series of specialised flat discs on a water-fed grinder, and you slowly work down and down until you get a polish that matches the top. But it's not easy work to do. More and more these days, it's sort of a machine on a jig. But so I'd love to know how some of the oldest, say 50, 60, 100-year-old sort of polished granite, it must have been manual. So, I mean, those cutting blades, I don't know how far back the cutting blades go that we use these days, but I think to some degree you can achieve, somewhat like timber, I guess. You can, with a fine polishing tool, you can probably achieve something of a flat surface. But it's just those corners are the thing that always blow me away, because I'm doing a lot of the work I do is kind of dry stone work and sort of hand laid stone walls and paving and things like that, and it's quite easy to just sort of splay a piece off by accident, and I've done some lettering projects. I've done letters for property titles. I've even done a headstone, and it's very, very slow and time-consuming work. And you get up close, and there's no degree of perfection once you really cast your eye up close. So that's the thing, going to that flatness thing we were talking about before. But to me, other than the pyramids, which I just, as I say, I'm so open now to what might have constructed the pyramids that, if you told me Ewoks did it, I'd follow you down that path.
Yeah. It's worth a look. It's as good a reason as any. Yeah, that's right.
Well, yeah, that's right. If Ewoks had taken over the Death Star and they were using like the laser on that thing to carve the pyramid, I'd explore it with you. I really would, because I don't have other answers.
Yeah.
Those megalithic works in Peru, I find gobsmacking, and part of the reason is.
What about the aqueducts and stuff like that? I mean, they made their plumbing carving, like drilling holes. What does it take to? I mean, you would have put some pipe work through some of your rocks and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah. So we should definitely touch on that. So the cut marks that you find, those core drills, and I was reading up on that a little while ago, and they were talking about the rate of penetration per turn of those core drills. It's quite deep per rotation. It's deeper on each rotation than what we can achieve now.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was interesting, because I mentioned earlier my mate Grubby, who's the Boilermaker, and he was saying that he had a thought on that when you're drilling into steel, you kind of do a pre-drill and then you do a secondary drill. Yeah,
you do like a pin needle drill to give you your spot, and then go wider and wider.
That's right. And so he said, he had a great perspective. He said, could it be that what you see left over in those core drills is not the primary hole, but, the second or third cut? Maybe that's why it can move through quicker, which I thought was pretty interesting.
That's a pretty good perspective, because it's obviously less material. If they've drilled at 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, you're dealing with less material each time. You're still moving at thousands of revolutions per minute to get that
Yeah.
clean cut, you know?
Absolutely. And again, the thing with using core drills, I've sort of only ever used sort of 20, 50, and 80 mil core drills on granite before. Not all of it on my own equipment, but again, one of the things you have to take in consideration is whatever machine you're using to cut those core drills, that has to be held static.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
got to
that's
be
the
fixed.
thing.
Yeah, it's got to be very fixed in order to give you a clean hole. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not just that you need to have the capacity, because you see those pictures of like a little piece of, again, the copper pipe dipped in silica, and they're like, you've got a little bow jig that they're doing. To get the clean cuts in these things, you need some sort of a mounting system, and it comes back to that thing before. I mean, all of the things that I know of today that I can use in stonemasonry, and as I say, I predominantly do sort of fireplaces for people and dry stone walls, things like that. So it's not very precise work. And in the past, where I've lifted big, heavy stones, none of them have been dead flat or dead perfect. They've just been big, heavy hoers that I've had to move around. And so, as I say, I'm familiar with moving stones up to about a ton with mechanical levers and things like that.
But then finishing them to perfection, and is a completely different story.
It's a completely different thing. And like I say, I did that with vanity units and things like that. But I can actually trace back all the equipment I use today. I can fairly easily trace back, over a few hundred years. Plug-in feathers for splitting boulders and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But as you look at these megaliths, and there's nothing, like, they're just there. Like, the only evidence you have is the thing itself. You don't have any evidence of how it was built. You don't. People say, "Oh, where's the tools?" I say, "Well, I don't know. I don't leave my tools at work."
That's right.
I'll
that's
bring
right.
them home.
Yeah. Where's the evidence? I mean, and that.
The evidence is in them, and that's the interesting thing. But I was talking before about how the repetition of building something like the pyramids, where it's row after row, like it's very easy when you're doing a repeated motion to become complacent. At the direct opposite end of that, you have these polygonal
masonry.
Polygonal masonry of Peru, where it's the exact opposite of that. There is no two pieces the same.
They are ridiculous. What was your thoughts on the stuff that I sent you from Gympie, mate? What was your thoughts on that?
Which one was that one again? That was
the church wall. I sent you some pics of the church wall.
right. So that again. So that's really interesting to me, because that's another thing that I remember thinking about. It was 15 years ago, I was in India, and where you see those stones that bend around a corner, and they don't necessarily have a perfectly square edge, but they have a part of one stone will wrap around the little corner part of another stone. By the time I arrived in India in 2005, I'd seen images of that style of sort of cut around corner in images from Peru. And then I saw it when I was in India, and then I saw that same style when I was in Cambodia. And I remember thinking to myself, is this just a good idea that's commonly arrived at because people commonly arrive at good ideas in isolation, or is this something that has somehow been communicated? That was kind of the first time I ever even vaguely really entertained these thoughts that I'm now massively distracted by all the time. But those ones from the Gympie Pyramid, I found, they floored me because they're the exact same types of corner cuts and drilling cuts that you see all over the world.
Mate, and there's thousands of those stones, mate. That wall runs for about 400 metres around 3 or 4 corners. Like, it's insane.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's and to the best of your knowledge, does that come out of the Gympie Pyramid? That's just been put into these church walls unchanged, or?
So the story is that the indigenous people say the stones came from the Gympie Pyramid, and the Western story is that in the 1930s, someone had them on their property. The wall was so they had taken the stones down, but what they'd done is they'd numbered the stones when they took them apart, and they donated it to the church as a Depression era employment project. So that's why the edges are rough. They've been moved 2 or 3 times. However, even taking that into account, there's still some of that stuff you can't get a bit of paper between.
No, that's right.
And the other thing is too, and the carby that took us up there, they said if you look at it, some of them have been put in upside down, and she's right. You walk along the wall, and it's like that's the right stone for there, but you need to take it out and flip it around, and it'll fit better.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So yeah, essentially that's from the Gympie Pyramid. It's crazy stuff, man. So you know.
Well, that's another aspect that's probably like you just said something. I can't remember what you quite said there, but it jogged my memory. When you talk about moving stones with crowbars, with rollers, edging them into place like that, the other side to doing that is that it leaves a mark.
That's right.
So I was talking earlier in the chat about this machine that helped me on a job where he was picking up 650 kilo blocks of granite with a grabber.
Yeah.
But that was not without its collateral damage. But these blocks of stone were just these, there was these nice rough blocks of stone to sit around a fire pit. They didn't have to be perfect, but there was definitely marks in them that I had to sort of work away slightly with the chisel. Had to clean it up. So with these megalithic structures you look at, you don't sort of see the carved up, chipped off sections necessarily from a crowbar.
That's right.
That's the other thing that really you've got to suspend what you're thinking. And it's funny. Like I talk about this with people all the time, and you kind of get this. And the awkward thing about talking to a lot of people about this stuff is that you're often coming in cold. They might have just been sitting there chatting to you and saying, "Oh, did you see Djokovic won the Australian Open?" You go, "Yeah. Did you know that there's no reasonable..." You know what I mean? And then you break in with, there's perfectly cut, polished surfaces on a box in the King's Chamber. What?
Yeah.
And so, I always feel a bit weird coming into these conversations with people.
Are you finding, though, mate, that more people are open to it? I'm finding that. Like, there's more people discussing it now than ever before. Like, you can have these type of crazy conversations day to day now, and more people are open to them. Whereas, 20 years ago, people would just look at you like you were nuts.
Yeah, definitely. Look, a lot of the company I keep, not everyone I hang around with is, they are like-minded people. In fact, I often deliberately seek out unlike-minded people. But far more people, I think now, are willing to have a conversation that you don't have to complete, where you swap ideas back and forth. So I don't necessarily think we're going to get to the end of this podcast tonight, Triffin, and go, "Oh yeah, we've sorted that out. We've got the answers." Oh no,
mate, no. Well, for the listeners, we actually sort of spoke for like an hour before. We thought we should have turned the mic on earlier. We did like two or three. We did 2 or 3 little snippet podcasts. It was really excellent stuff. I think. We've started a conversation that I'm pretty sure probably won't end, mate. And that's totally fine.
I agree. Yeah, no, I find it quite. I think you and I first made contact with each other maybe 8 days ago. Yeah,
that's right. And we've the texts are long. Like I showed my wife, and she's like, "Wow, you guys are getting along." I'm like, "Yeah, we've just we're on the same wavelength." Because
yeah, absolutely.
The only way to do this, mate, is through constant discourse and conversation, and. I'll say something you don't agree with, and you'll say something I don't agree with, but that's okay, because it's like, okay, well, what?
Brilliant.
Because what made you come to that conclusion, Bushy? What made you come to that conclusion? Well, this is why. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I can add that perspective. I still may not agree with it totally. However, I can't discount it because you've given me a reasonable explanation as to how you arrived at that, and it's all about discourse, mate, and talking constantly about it. And I think with these megaliths that we're talking about, I truly believe that there is answers in these structures, and there's a pattern that's developing. Because through my work, there isn't a continent on the planet I haven't got something from or moved something to, apart from Antarctica, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, because of that, and logic, right? I think about things logically, and what I'm developing, looking at all this stuff, and talking to blokes like yourself, it's like there's a pattern emerging, and there's a secrets that needs to be unravelled here, and we need to talk about it. We have to,
we have to talk about
it. Because it's the only, like as I say, we met over Instagram 8 days ago. You've already told me about a welder, mate. You've already got these multiple perspectives that I'm super curious about. I've got mates of consciousness and road builders and all that stuff that have got all their perspectives, and you bring those circles together. And that's the heartening thing, I think, these days, that blokes like yourself and myself, well, we're trying to deal with our own crap as well. Like, I know you're one of your tags is midlife fitness. I know you're starting to look after yourself. That's me too, mate. I've got a gym outside the studio, body, mind, soul, that sort of stuff. And now that we're sort of dealing with our own bullshit and getting over ourselves, we're like, hang on a minute. We're looking around and going, hang on a minute, what the fuck? Like, hold on a second. Like,
yeah. What is this?
Yeah. When did?
Well, look, I'll tell you. Since we're on that, so I'll tell you a little. So I've come from the background I've come from, and I grew up in a sort of a left-leaning Labor household, and I still predominantly, hold a lot of those ideas close to my heart.
Too bad the Labor Party doesn't. But keep going.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They don't. Well, look, I don't vote for them. I don't vote for them. Last election came through. I won't go into who I voted for, but I certainly didn't vote for the prick that's in the office now, and I certainly didn't vote for the prick that's trying to get into his seat.
No, me either.
Around about the time that Trump got in, was around about the time, there's a whole bunch of things going on back there that kind of shook me up a bit, because when I stand back and look at it now, I realise that I had let myself slip a little bit into that silo, that echo chamber that people talk about a lot.
Yeah.
Whatever. That's where I was. I don't need to say why or how or who.
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that, mate, because all the boys that I know, it was about 4 or 5 years ago. Everyone says that. About 4 years ago, I woke up one day and went, hang on a minute, I've got to change some stuff, like, now.
Yeah.
So I don't know what was going on, in the universe back at that time. However, I know a lot of blokes that 3, 4, 5 years ago, in that window, they changed their existence. Yeah.
Well, this is it. I mean, around about that, like I say, I woke up the day after Trump got in, and I had a hangover that could have collapsed a civilization on its own. And I was scratching my head, and I'm thinking, Jesus, what happened? And da. I threw on the regular radio stations I listened to, and they sort of didn't have an answer. And I thought, okay, I've missed something here. And I was sort of, around that time, I started sort of getting on YouTube and sort of seeking out all the voices that I used to ignore, Yeah, and not because I love them, not because I like them now, So this is the thing, I came to a conclusion around about then. I started watching all sorts of stuff. Stuff I was already into and stuff that I felt absolutely opposed to. But then you stagger across a person, in the political spectrum or the intellectual spectrum or whatever it is. You say, okay, here's a dude, and I disagree with 98% of what this person's got to say.
Yeah.
But that 2% little thing over there, turns out I agree with that 100%. But you get bound up in this echo chamber, and you refuse to listen to anything that person said because of one thing they've said.
That's right.
So then that happens, and then around about that time I was chatting with a bloke who's local around my way, and him and I, through conversation, realised that we both loved the idea of having a little house on 20 acres that was off the grid, and having a big-ass orchard and maybe a cow that we knock on the head once a year, and all these little things. Now, I was probably coming from a little bit of a 1970s back to the earth movement, which is what my parents were, and maybe a little bit of that Earth Garden magazine perspective, the permaculture stuff.
Yeah.
But this guy, it really surprised me that this guy wanted this same thing that I wanted, like almost down to the letter, the same thing.
Yeah.
I said, well, what's your motivation for that? And he just said to me, he goes, every time I turn around, some asshole's wanting more money from me, the tax department, the utility. He was coming purely from a fiscal background, and he was on the opposite side of politics to me, and probably even, you might even say, was leaning towards what the Americans might call that libertarian kind of perspective, let's say.
Sure, yeah.
Here's him and I having a very excited conversation for a couple of hours about this idea that we'd love to embrace. I started over there, he started over the opposite direction.
And
here we are in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, and by that stage, I'm approaching my late 30s and and I'm starting to think to myself more and more, I need to shut the fuck up and listen.
Yeah.
And I need to stop being quite so insistent that I know anything. I need to actually. It was sort of weird. I hit 40, and almost like it was a rebirth. Around about the time I hit 40, I got off the piss, and I've been off it ever since. And all this kind of stuff. Because I know that your show talks a lot about consciousness and making sense of the chaos of life.
Yes.
And as much as the megalithic stuff that we've discussed tonight really speaks to me, I'm fascinated by it because I really think we need to work out what our history is so that we can start to make sense of where we are and where we need to go. That concept that you talked about, I think in your very your very first podcast I listened to, you were talking about consciousness with your friend up near the quarry there.
Yeah.
You know, and I was sitting there, and I've actually felt when I was listening to that I was sitting next to you and just listening on a rock in this quarry in the sun, because it's not unlike a lot of conversations that I am having frequently with all sorts of people of all sorts of ages.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you say, the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of people.
We're waking up. There's a percentage of us that are waking up, as opposed to being woke, which is don't even get me started.
Don't even get me started.
Right. As opposed to that, people are waking up to what is going on around them and asking questions, because this world that we have been led to believe that will bring us satisfaction doesn't. It doesn't feed our souls. Okay, we are devoid of that, and especially as men, you know, our fathers and our fathers' fathers, they fought wars, they were into the Depression, and there was a way of doing things, and part of that was not looking into your own consciousness and your emotions and your feelings and all these things that we were told growing up. Don't do that, mate. Work hard, get after it. You know, you know the drill. You know, we grew up in Central Victoria. We know what's going on, and you get to that age where it's like, hang on a minute, this doesn't work. You know, like it just doesn't. So, you know, and as you say, you wake up to yourself and realise, oh shit, I don't actually know anything about anything. However, at the same time, I could do whatever the fuck I want.
That's right.
You know what I mean? It's like, that's you talk to people and it's almost like a measuring stick. And I'm not going to say I understand it at all, because I don't. However, I can wrap my head around this concept where, on one hand, you're a drop in the ocean forgot about.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you're the most powerful creator that ever existed, ever. Yeah, that's right. And everything in between. Exactly. You are those things at once and everything in between. And you talk about common ground. You know, when I was working up in PNG, it was a goddamn United Nations. And it was a very, like, not working with the native people up there, what an amazing experience. However, on the rig, there was something at one time, there was like 30 nationalities, you know, every religion you can think of, you know, God knows how many languages. And, you know, like, I had boys on my laydown yard. I had 300 containers and I was managing logistical operation. And there was a period there where we couldn't actually communicate. You know,
right.
Because I spoke English and no one else really did. And it's like, I was the boss. And we worked out hand signals and stuff like that. Interestingly, you know, the peace pipe, the Indian peace pipe, tobacco was the original thing that was in that peace pipe. And one of the things we connected through was sharing tobacco. At Smoko, like, I'd get, you know, here's a Filipino cigarette, here's a Japanese cigarette, and here's an Australian cigarette. And through that, which is weird, considering, you know, the echoes through time, we found a common ground. You can find common ground with anyone, and the dichotomy and the diversity of existence is what it's actually about, because we don't have the right idea, right? If we had the right idea, the place wouldn't be in as much chaos as it is, right? So maybe the right idea is a conglomerate of many ideas. However, before you even get anywhere near there, you got to make peace with yourself. You got to make peace with your demons. You got to shake your demon's hand, and you got to give him a cuddle, you know, and say, it's all right, mate. It's all good. You know, these are things. 99% of the answers that you seek are within. Yeah. And that's a hard one to swallow, you know. Like, and I'm sure, as you say, the day after Trump won, you hung over, you probably looked in the mirror and went, oh fuck. Oh fuck.
Well, I can tell. I mean, I had a moment. It was in 2017. I turned 40 in the middle of 2017, and I sort of tried to work out how to define this for a while, because I came to that realization I was never an alcoholic. I was just a really good boozer.
You know? It just loved to drink. Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, like if it was an Olympic sport, then there was some talent scouts hanging around me. But
You'd place respectively in your division, mate. Yeah.
that's right. That's right. So I was sitting around. I got up one morning, and I did what I'd done a few Saturdays in a row, and I had a bit of a blurt out in the garden, and then I came in to scrub myself up and get on with the day. And you have that one last little blurt in the face. Sometimes it's yellow, that bile colour.
Yeah.
And I did that, and because the night before I'd been chugging down rollies like a legend.
Yeah.
And I looked down, and there was just this little streak of blood in what I just produced from, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when you do that in the bathroom basin, and you look up, and there's a mirror right there, and that's you, and you've got this shit in your beard, and your eyes are all watery, and you're looking at yourself, going, "Is this it? Is this what we do now?"
Yeah. This is what we do now. We're spewing in the sink on a Saturday morning. There's a bit of blood in it. That's what we do.
That's what we do. And it wasn't that day. Like, I didn't actually think at that moment I need to quit drinking booze. But a couple of things happened. I ended up sort of doing this boot camp challenge almost as a dare to myself to see if I could even do it. And then it kind of set me rolling. And now I've done marathons. I go hit the gym. I run. I've been off the piss. I'm playing footy, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, right.
But it was a real.
Well, congratulations, mate. Congratulations. It's
no,
awesome.
thanks, man. No, it's good. Everything got better. Look, literally everything got better.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing when you change that perspective, man. And it frees your mind. That whole discipline equals freedom. There's
100%. Yeah, Jocko Willing, big. Oh, yeah, what a dude.
Yeah.
funny
I've watched that video good. I don't know how many hundreds of times, mate. I don't know how many hundreds of times.
Good, yeah. There's another one I love, which is C.T. Fletcher. He's that power lifter.
Oh yeah, he's nuts. Yeah, C.T. Fletcher. Yeah.
He doesn't play at all.
No.
The conversation we're having at the moment is interesting. I caught up with a mate of mine about a month ago, and he's a ripper guy, and he's worked, he's done the thing, he's worked hard over the years and done all this stuff, and at one stage he had a bunch of different investment properties. He's done very, very nicely for himself, and he's got a bit of property, and he's got a heap of stuff, and he's got a shed, and there's all sorts of stuff in the shed, and he's got heaps of stuff. And I was sitting there, and we were looking out over the property at one stage, and he was saying how he's going to have an auction soon to get rid of some stuff, and this and that, and he said, he goes, that shed's full, and that shed's full, and da-da-da. I said, "Oh yeah, I guess it's sort of a sign of everything that you've achieved over the years, isn't it?" And he just sort of turned to me. He goes, "I've had my time over. I wouldn't have any of it."
Yeah.
And I go, "Really?" He goes, "I'd be in a shack." He goes, "Really?" He goes, "It's not that I hate living here, but I've complicated so many things around me." And like, right,
Well, I think it's fascinating, mate. I think that first podcast you're talking about on the Rock. And if anyone goes back and listens to that, fair warning, I used my phone. Like, you guys got no idea how far it's come. However...
Yeah. It was like a demo tape.
Yeah, pretty much, mate, pretty much.
Yeah.
However, I think it was that day we were watching Neil Donald Walsh, and he wrote the Conversations with God books, which are very fascinating on their own. And he told a story about his father. Now, his father had done everything that he was told to do. He got the job, he got the house, he got the car, he got the girl, he had the kids, he got the better car, he got the better house. You know what I mean? He did that. He did it, and he did it, and he did every single step he was supposed to do to bring him happiness. And he got to the end of his life and told Neil that he was miserable and wishes he could go over again and not, I did everything. He was questioning his existence because he goes, I did everything I was supposed to do, and I'm not happy. Yeah. And it's like, to me, that's exactly right. And that's the quest the quest for self, mate. I sat back down with Frank the other day. Actually, Quest for Self 6 is in the bag already. We talked about trauma and knowledge and control, and how it shapes our existence, and it is a quest for self. However, it's all bullshit. That's the thing. And material stuff is good, don't get me wrong. You work hard and you can get the stuff that you want. At the end of the day, it doesn't define you. You know, like
No.
I showed you photos of the studio. I sent you some before, and like
Yeah, beautiful.
everything you see here is second hand, mate. There's nothing new. Like
Yep.
everything you obviously, you know, the Lava Land bits and pieces I've obviously bought new, but all the furniture, all that stuff, that's all. You know, I literally got some of it from the dump, mate. You know what I mean? Like that's, and because it's not about having brand new stuff. It's the same with my gym. My gym out there, you know, I've got a cross trainer. I've got enough there to get me functional. I think today the whole lot's cost me $300. You know.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
You know, and it's like this attached to material possessions and money. Like, yeah, unfortunately, we're material girls in a material world, and if you think no one cares, stop paying your bills. However, at the same time, it's not what it's about. You know, like if I think I worked FIFO for 10 years, I rented big houses and all that sort of stuff, and I've got a little 3-bedroom double brick house, you know, on the outskirts of Western Brisbane, on 3/4 of an acre, and it's home. You know, and it's home, and I don't need any more than that. You know, like you shouldn't those material things that they can end up defining you, I think. And what should define you is your experiences. You know, like the one we're having now, mate. How cool is it that we met through Instagram 8 days ago, and now we're an hour into a podcast. But you know, for the listeners at home, we're multiple hours into a conversation before we even turn the mics on. You know, it's
Absolutely.
going on for days, and this experience and the friendship that we're building, that'll help us forever now. You know what I mean? And even if we didn't do another podcast, which I'm sure we will, however,
I think so.
It's forever there. This moment in time will now be captured, and will be forever there for not only our friends and our family and the awesome listeners of Unlocking the Code, but anyone and ourselves as well. We can look back on this in 10 years' time, and this is an experience, you know? And that's what it's about. It's about experiences. It's not about stuff as much.
No, it's not. Well, it's about that. You know, I've been involved in this over 35s, this Masters footy team, and last year we had a big push. You know, we had you remember the AFL player Wayne Schwartz?
Yes.
Remember him?
Yep.
Schwatter. He came to speak to us about men's mental health and suicide prevention and talking to your friends and reaching out for help, and stuff like that. We had that at the start of the year. That was our registration day. And this is a young team. We only formed about 5 years ago, and we've had some pretty good times, and we've had mixed success on the field and this and that. But last year, I took on the role as the president, and you know, I really thought to myself, well, I'm going to lead with this message from Schwatter. And across last year, I had quite a number of guys sort of approach me and say, hey, it might be worth calling such and such over there. I think he's struggling. Or guys that come up to me and say, oh, you've got 5 minutes to have a chat and this and that. And I'm very open to that, and I'm very open to emotions. I actually can, you know, fall apart and start blubbering, you know, quite quickly and quite easily over surprising things.
There's nothing wrong with that, mate. Nothing wrong.
No,
with
not at all. No, I give zero fucks. I'm years caring about that. But
isn't that part of the process though? You get to a point where it's like when you become comfortable in yourself, and I want you to finish your thought. However, you become comfortable in yourself, and you wake up one day and go, "Do you know what? I actually don't give a fuck anymore." You know what I mean? I'm just going to be who I am, whatever. You know, and there's freedom in that as well.
There's total freedom in it, dude. And for me, a lot of it started when I was 15. My mum and dad split up, and my auntie had died the year before that, and there was a whole heap of shit, and I was sort of learning that some of the people I thought were friends at school weren't friends, and all that sort of stuff. And I went through all that sort of shit, and, you know, those angry teenage years. And
yeah.
I'm out of the tail end of that all those years ago. And then there's people in the world that live in war-ravaged countries, and there's far worse things. But I came through that, and I thought, well, God, I got through that. It wasn't the worst. It was bad, but it wasn't the worst thing that could happen to me. And I got through it and got a perspective as a result of it. And it was really emotional. And a lot of the time, I got through it by just accepting that it was emotional.
Yeah.
And this perspective that I took into this footy team last year, once they elected me as the president, you know, I was quite gobsmacked, to be honest, at the amount of guys who would just come up to me and just grab 5 minutes, and, you know, this has been a bit of a struggle, I've had a hard week, and da. And so we were all doing it. all of us guys were all talking to each other. We had this old bloke come on board who showed up one afternoon, and he just started, watching us train. And in the end, he said, "Oh, look, I'll look after the water bottles and your first aid, and I'll come to games and strap for you." And unbeknownst to us, all of last year, his wife had been getting treated for cancer.
Yeah.
And we were the crutch that he leant on.
Yeah,
And he
right.
told us just as we were about to play our last game of the year, we all gathered around this old bloke. He's in his 70s. You know, we all gathered around, and there was tears rolling down a bunch of our eyes. We went out there, we absolutely pumped it. We had games last year where we moved, like for a team of blokes in their 40s,
Yeah.
we were moving very, very silky.
Yes.
And we were moving
Yes.
very, very sure, you know. And I said to a couple of guys at the end of the year, I said, do you think part of it was that we just all got closer, like the trust?
It's the brotherhood, man. The brotherhood.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the fraternity. And
Yeah.
it wasn't just that the trust was there because we'd played for 4 years and we knew what each other could do. It almost felt like we cracked up another layer.
Yeah, because you did. You're beginning to understand each other. And, I'm a teacher. Well, I ended up being a teacher a few years ago. And, part of my course, I teach logistics and leadership and stuff. But part of my course, I found, and one of the reasons behind the podcast and the quest for self, and because I was going through my own journey. And as a teacher, I was sharing my journey with my students, and it was resonating. And say, like, I had classes back in the day, 30 plus, you know what I mean? And most of these are young men, ages 16 to 40, basically. And we talk about, personal, how we present ourselves and all these sorts of things. And I openly talk. I've suffered depression on and off, and didn't understand that I did until a few years ago. However, it's quite clear since I was 15, and even probably before that. And to work through the process and stuff like that. And I say to everyone, like, say 30 blokes in the room, and I'll go, righto, close your eyes, and then I'm going to ask you, who knows the black dog, who's suffered the black dog, who's been depressed, and they get them to close their eyes and raise your hand. And mate, almost every time it's like 20 plus blokes put their hand up, and I say, open your eyes. And they look around, all these blokes got their hands up, and I said, now I bet that you felt alone during your time. Look around you.
Yeah.
You're actually not. We've just been told that we can't talk to each other. My name's Triffin Bushy. Can you imagine what happened to me in central Victoria in the 80s and early 90s, mate? I'm a bit of a weird bloke to boot, Yeah. I got the piss beaten out of me,
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. And just because you got a name that doesn't fit with everybody else's idea of what a name is.
Exactly that, and purely for that reason. Yeah. And I'm a weirdo. It's okay. It's fine. However,
we're good with it.
That's sort of half the reason I speak up now, mate. It's like, okay, listen, I survived that. I've survived a whole heap of other shit. It's like, well, may as well stand up and talk and share my journey, because. And like you say, that what you paid me one of the biggest compliments you could pay me by the fact you said the very first podcast we did, you felt like you were sitting on the quarry next to us. That's all I try and do, mate. That's all I try and do with every podcast. I want you blokes to be, and girls as well, to feel like you're sitting in the studio with me and whoever it is, just being part of our conversation. And especially for blokes that have suffered depression and the stereotypes, I think. And kudos to you for stepping up and talking as well, mate. Very well done. However, every time one person like us steps up and talk, there's 10 that don't talk. However, they get strength from you talking. And as you say, like throughout the year, you would have had blokes that you never would have thought in a million years come up to you and say, can I have 5 minutes, And I've had the same thing happen to me in teaching, mate. I get to the end of the week and a bloke that's hadn't said boo all week but done his work comes up to me and goes, mate, you've changed my life. I'm like, well, you didn't even say anything, mate. He goes, oh, look, my perspective's been shifted. So it's about speaking up and talking, mate, So, and look, I've got no doubt that if you boys all chatted amongst yourselves, because it wouldn't have been them just talking to you, they would have started talking to each other more, When you're out there fighting for the bloke next to you, and the bloke next to you has been through some shit and he's still next to you, mate, you're going to put in that extra step. You're going to make sure that kick goes straight. You're going to make sure that shepherd works, because you're going into battle, and it's something that we're missing, especially as men, I think. understanding that yes, footy's important, all the having a good time and all that stuff's important. However, we're very simple beings. However, at the same time, we're bloody complex, and we do feel very deeply, and we haven't been taught how to deal with that shit. And blokes like yourself and myself, and the other boys that have been brave enough to come on and talk about their story. That's important because it shows that it's okay. It's okay,
Well, that is, it's okay. And one of the things I started talking about a bit last year, because, I had to step up at public functions and talk about what the club's doing and the direction we're hoping to go in and things like that. I just started to talk about the ripple effect, The thing that I found is that once I recognised that the direction I was personally going in wasn't tantamount to success, and I don't necessarily mean financial success. I just mean
life, mate. The life was not good. Yeah.
Life was not good, and I could make it better, and so I made it better. And after one thing, for example, I took on a huge responsibility for my own health and physical fitness, like almost to the point where, as good as I used to be at drinking, is as obsessive as I am now for like health and fitness and running.
Yeah, well, you got to shift, and that's the thing. You got to shift. Those people that do have addictive tendencies, you can actually shift that positively. You can make it work for you.
Yes, I think so. Well, one of the things, this is the thing that's really, locked it in for me, is I got a son. He's 10 now. Back then he was 8, and he'd been begging me for a shoulder ride for months and months and months, and I always had a sore back, I always had a sore back from work, and it was always sore, Anyway, I think maybe I was 6 or 8 weeks into looking after myself, and I felt like I dropped 20 years, I felt so fucking good, and I snuck up behind him and I grabbed him and I put him up on my shoulders in one swoop, and just kept walking along, and he goes, "Oh, what's going on, Dad? I thought your back hurt." And I said, no, it's all good now. I think my back's fine. He goes, "Oh, cool." And then he said, this is where I get worked up about it. He said to me, "Is this because you got off the booze and started exercising?" I said, I think that's why, yeah. And he just sort of patted me on the head and he goes, "Well, why don't you keep doing it?" And from that point on, I'm telling you, man, from that point on, I feel like there's this ripple effect, and this, like I kept talking about this group of blokes I kick a footy with.
Yeah.
We've taken responsibility for our emotional state. We're talking to each other. We're actively working on our mental health. The ripple effect's going outward.
Yeah.
People in the community come to us and say, "Look, you guys are holding up a banner for how this should be done. Can you come and talk to us about what you're doing?"
Absolutely.
And I don't know what to say. To be honest, I don't know what to say because it sort of just happened.
Yeah.
And I think, maybe this might be a good way to sort of go back to what we were talking about earlier, like that point about 4 or 5 years ago, which is actually when this footy team first formed.
Yeah.
Heaps of guys I know, and you were saying the same about blokes, heaps of them just started sort of broke out of this sort of shackled idea and go, "Fucking hang on, what's going on? What's going on?"
Yeah, hang on a minute. This doesn't make sense. Like, is anyone paying attention to what the fuck's going on? Like, you know what I mean?
And maybe, you know what? Maybe it probably wasn't even when Trump got elected. Probably
no, it was before that for me. It was before
when he first started. I reckon it was when he first started running for president. I reckon you could say when he stepped on and said, "I'm going to go for president," everyone went, "What? Hang on." Everyone kind of, "Is this happening?"
Yeah.
And I can't help but thinking around it, because that's about 12 months before, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah. It's about 12, 14 months before, yeah.
So maybe we say that. Maybe we look at that point and we go, that was when the shroud came off. That was when the curtains parted and everyone went, "Fuck, hang on."
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, see, for me, I'd started teaching, right? I know, long story short, I had a jungle virus in 2013, nearly died. However, I was 84 kilos prior to that. Muscles wasted away, ate nothing but pasta, cheese and butter, and basically ballooned out to 115, 120 kilos. And I had no muscle strength. Like you can imagine, I was in atrophy, man. I've told this story before. I'll explain it more offline, but the listeners have heard it a few times. However, I was teaching, and as part of the logistics, like I took a lot of photos because some of the stuff I did was pretty cool, and I documented it through photography, basically, because I like taking photos. And I'm very skinny up there in PNG. And one of the students, it's actually, I'm pretty sure it's Caleb, and he's been on the podcast a couple of times. He's due to come on again. We've sort of been talking. However, he's looking at the photos in PNG, and he turns around, and it was either him or someone else next. It was that class, but someone goes, I guess they don't sell donuts over in PNG. And I was like, okay. And look, blokes, we're funny, mate. You know what I mean? You get chicks look in the mirror and they're skinny and beautiful, and they see someone fat. Whereas, you know, we look in the mirror, we're 120 kilos, and, you know, you're a bit of all right, mate. You just don't see it.
God.
Yeah, right. And, you know, and that was sort of like, oh, crap, you know. And I started, you know, and people, because I got down to 80 kilos October 18, and I'm back in the 80s now, but I sort of up to 90-ish. I held at 90 for a long time. However, I always got to remind myself that I came from 120, you know, so...
Yeah.
And I did 800 Ks on my bike last year. You know, my mountain bike is my escape, you know, and when you're training and your perspective just totally shifts, and it's next level stuff, man. And yeah, it's sort of similar to my teaching, sharing my story. You know, it affects everything. And this podcast, I've had blokes contact me and go, mate, thank you very much. You know, it's like, it's the ripple effect, man. How do you?
It is a ripple effect, you know, and
But it all comes back to self, mate. You know, I know, obviously, your boy, you know, and I imagine, you know, your partner and all that sort of. You start doing it for them. However, you know, you wake up and go, shit. I bet. For me, it was like I finally met my wife, and I finally met someone I want to spend the rest of my life with, and it's like, well, she doesn't deserve my shit.
No, that's right.
So I better figure it out. You know, because unfortunately, as blokes, when we explode, we normally take it out on people who least deserve it, and they're the closest to us. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so I started figuring out my stuff, and it's okay. Well, I started doing it for her, and I still do for her and my girls. And however, it's also for me, and that's not. There's no ego there. That's not me being arrogant, because you've got to look after number one. How can I be the best father, the best husband, the best mate, the best podcaster, teacher, lover, artist, whatever the fuck it is, if I'm not the best version of me and I'm not constantly working on that? You can't be. You can't be the best, you know what I mean? You've got to, and it sounds like what you boys are doing, like, that's awesome, you know what I mean? Like, as I say, I've got to come back down to Victoria. I've got a heap of family still in Ballarat, so we'll have to hook up next time I come down, and
Yeah, come and have a kick.
Yeah, I'd love to, mate. I don't play anymore. Like, the idea of, I miss it. I miss footy. Like, I put on the boots for nearly 20 years, you know, and part of this is actually my next phase of training, and the reason I know I have to do it is because I really don't want to. There's a beautiful oval down the road, and I mean beautiful. Like, the guy obviously is an AFL supporter because he loves the AFL oval and lets the NRL oval go to... It's not bad, but the AFL oval's far better. Yeah. And one of the things I know I've got to do is dig the footy out and go running around the oval and just do some old school drills, you know? And the reason I know I have to do that is because I really don't want to.
Oh, yeah. Oh, shit, yeah, dude. Absolutely.
You know,
I mean, that's that thing that, you know, you mentioned Jocko Willink earlier about disciplining people through, and just having that voice in your head, you know. I try to squeeze my runs to the gym in early in the morning so it doesn't bite into family time.
Me too, mate. Yeah, early in the morning, yeah.
And that alarm goes off, and you go, oh, fuck.
Oh, mate, I've been talking to my wife about it, and she's like, oh, I don't jump up. She goes, oh, you're always full of energy going to the gym, and you're always excited. It's like, hang on a minute, sweetheart. And definitely not. Right? That alarm goes off 4:30, quarter to 5, 5 o'clock, depending on the day when I'm starting. It's like, yeah, I'm still arguing. If I go for a ride, like I'm lucky, I've got a trail a rail trail to do my riding on just for workouts and stuff. And like, I've been trying to convince myself to turn around. I'm a kilometre into the ride, and I'm still trying to convince myself to turn around and go back to bed. You know, it's like But by the time if you get past that, and you know you get your 20 Ks done, you know, it's awesome. You know, but it's also for those that are listening that want to get back into fitness and stuff, and I'm sure you'll concur with me. When I realised I was 120 kilos, and people go, "How did you start?" I said, "I started on my lounge room floor on a Minnie Mouse blanket, and I would literally do push-ups on my knees. Right? Not proper push-ups. I would do 5 push-ups, and I'd be stuffed. I'd do 10 sit-ups, and I'd do 5 squats, and that's how I started. That's it.
Yeah.
And I talk about riding my bike. My ride now for a workout is 20 k's, and I'm doing 20 k's an hour average pretty much over that time. When I started, I'd do 5 k's, and I'd be stuffed. But I could ride 45, 50 k's tomorrow, and my legs would be sore, but I'd be fine.
Yeah. But so much of it's in the mind as well. Much it's all in the mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
I trained up for the marathon last year in Melbourne, and I did it to raise funds for a cause close to my heart. And, so we're leading into it. 3 days a week, I was getting up early and doing like 10 or 15 Ks. Sometimes getting up early doing a 21 K before work. And I'd talk to people, and they'd say, "Oh, I don't know how you do it. I can't even run 3 Ks." And so let me get something straight. The first 3 Ks eats shit.
Yeah.
The first 3 Ks feels terrible.
It sucks.
Nothing's kicked in. You feel awful. You think, this is pointless, I'll go home.
Yeah.
Once you pass that I think they call it the flow.
Yeah. You get into the zone.
Get in the flow.
Yeah.
Once you're in that flow, man, if you time it right, you pace yourself, you can run 50 Ks. But you've got to get into that flow. And I reckon the worst part of it is that like you're saying, that first little hump where your brain is screaming, "Go back to bed."
Yeah.
Stop it, eat a donut, whatever.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
You've got to break through that. Once you're through that, and also I generally listen to heavy metal while I'm running too, so...
Oh, yeah, I've got a workout mix, I've got a mix there, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Isn't it funny that, like, you and I would probably be quite confusing because we probably come across as sort of maybe a little bit new agey and spiritual, but we listen to thrash.
Yeah. No, there's plenty of heavy stuff in my playlist, mate. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, magic. That's grouse, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it gets you going, mate. It gets you going. That's the thing.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah, man. And you've got it. It's that hump. Like I say, my mountain bike is my meditation, and it is for me. And I do have to run, and that's my big takeaway. That's this year. I'm going back to the oval, and I'm going to do all the terrible drills, the burpees, and all the shit. And I have to do it because I don't want to, but I know if I do it, it'll serve me very well. However, my mountain bike is my meditation, and running's never been my favourite thing. However, when you're on the bike, you get in. It's the same thing. You get into the cadence, and it's just you and the bike and the music and the track, and there's nothing else. Like you are the bike is you. And you just, and then the thing about mountain biking for me is that when you get into some of those tracks with the jumps and stuff like that, the flow through there, man, because there's no time. You're barreling down a hill, jumps and berms. There's no time that you're not worrying about anything else, mate. Yeah. And I collect Ks on the track, so when I go into the bush, I can attack that stuff, and it's yeah. But I do miss the footy, mate. I'll definitely, if it's the seasons I want to come down, I'll come and have a kick for sure.
Beautiful, mate. Yeah. I'll hold you to it if you're in town.
Absolutely. No, fine. That's fair enough, mate. I do miss it. The idea of being hit, I just don't like the idea of being hit anymore.
No. Well, that is one of the problems with playing masters footy with blokes over 35. It's not uncommon that, some gigantic plumber named Bruce, comes tearing through from forward pocket.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
It's not that he's a fast bloke, but he's got enough of a head of steam up, and he's 142 kilos.
That's right. You've got to get. Yeah, he's just going to flatten you. Yeah, I miss the camaraderie. I miss the footy. I miss everything about it. But the idea of being hit by old Brucey, I'm not keen. But I'd love to come and have a kick, mate. I definitely.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, mate, we've spewed down a perspective. That's totally awesome. And I was thinking while we're having that conversation, this is just going to be a stonemason's perspective because we've covered so many things. It's been an excellent conversation. However,
thanks, mate,
let's spew back on to the megaliths. So we've basically established that myself with 20 years logistic experience, yourself with 20 years stone experience, between us, we got no fucking idea about how they did most of it. So,
Not one.
So, what are our ideas?
Can we go fantastical?
No, mate. There's nothing. Nothing's off the table. This is mate science at its purest. There's nothing off the table. So
I think if you go fantastical, then you have to. So the
okay.
idea that-
So if we're going to go fantastical, the first one I want your perspective on is aliens.
Well, man. So we're aliens. So
Not
alien thing.
Let's be more specific, because I think with us, it's becoming clear that we're just going to delve down any rabbit hole that we dive into.
Yes.
Did the aliens build the pyramids and Baalbek? Okay, so let's focus on Baalbek and the pyramids, because we know those very well. However, so the idea being, so what's your thoughts on the idea that the aliens come down and they built the pyramids for whatever reason, and then they left again, right? That or you want to go Stargate, their landing platforms, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, Stargate landing platforms. Look, so if you just touch on the concept of alien, like alien is the unknown.
Yes.
So is the alien from out there in space, or is the alien from back beyond the Younger Drive, back beyond the Ice Age, back in time, at a stage that we can't imagine, because I assume your listeners are probably familiar with a lot of the, let's say, the preparatory work of this kind of conversation with the Younger Drive's impact hypothesis.
Yes. Yes.
All of that sort of stuff. You've built that up.
Yep.
So, look, we don't know. I've been absolutely fascinated lately by, Bob Lazar's story
Yes.
and the thing that he worked on, and he talked about that on the JRE podcast.
Isn't that interesting that last year the biggest podcast in the world basically confirmed that UFOs existed, and it didn't even blip on the mainstream radar?
Mainstream radio, well, they didn't touch it.
No.
He's getting something like 200 million downloads a month.
It's more than that now. I think he was over a billion downloads a year in 2017 or something. So I don't even know. Like, it's an stupidly insane, crazy number.
Yeah. And you couple that with the Netflix stuff, and then you couple that with, the great thing with what he does is, it's interesting when you see a guest come on Rogan, and then while you're listening to that podcast, if it's just come out that day, you have a look at their Instagram account, and they've got 22,000 followers. And then about 4 or 5 hours later, you check in and they've got 32,000 followers.
Yeah, exactly. It just happens that quickly, yeah.
Just happened. But I think I said earlier that once you've exhausted everything that you see in your mind as being feasible, possible, practical, whatever, you're just left with the unknown. I don't know. Every culture on the planet, every continent on the planet seems to have some imitation painted on the wall of a cave or carved into a stone somewhere of a figure in a flying machine, of those almond-eyed shaped looking things. There's all this footage that's coming out now that everybody's carrying a TV studio in their pocket of unknown entities in the sky. There's that Tic Tac story of that fellow, that American pilot.
Yeah.
All of this stuff.
So there's two sides to it, right? As far as you would be ignorant, and I think you'll agree with me, to look up at the sky. You live in central Victoria. There wouldn't be a lot of light pollution where you are. You've seen the Milky Way at its finest.
Yeah. Yep.
You would be ignorant to say that amongst all that, we're the only ones. However, are the aliens or the extraterrestrials, whatever they are, that are obviously here? There's unequivocal proof that they're here. Are they just us from a forward time, or are they the survivors of the cataclysm? I tend to think that I don't buy into the, like, when I say aliens, it's like the grey, the grey aliens with the big eyes and the slits. That was they built all this stuff. I think we built it. Okay.
Yeah.
But is it alien to us? Like, and I pick up what you're putting down there. Yes, it is, because I think it's just, we have to. Was it Sherlock Holmes? When you eliminate everything that's possible, the impossible becomes possible. You know.
Well, let me throw this at you as sort of a perspective to look at it from. I listened to an interview, I think about 3 or 4 years ago on Radio National, a lady who had travelled out into the Western Sahara, I think with these Bedouin, camel herder types, and these blokes who they live out there. She had this quite amazing story to tell, and being held at gunpoint by some terrorists, all sorts of crazy shit. But one night they were sitting there under the stars with this fellow who was their guide, and they were just sitting around having some food, and it was dark, and you can imagine out in the middle of the Sahara, the sky is just absolutely lit up with stars. And an aeroplane went over, like a passenger jet went up and over top of them. And she explained, she said something about the aeroplane, and the fellow who was there with her as a guide asked the translator what she just said. And she started to describe to the translator that passenger jet is possibly going, London to Sydney or whatever, and it's full of people. This guy translated that to the Bedouin fellow, and he laughed hysterically. He basically said to her, "That's the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard. That is just not possible." Yeah? This dude's lived out in the desert his whole life. As far as he's concerned, there's no passenger jet.
Yeah.
So, the alien thing, I as I say, I just don't know what built these things. I think human hands have built these things.
Yes.
But with what? With what? And where did that information or that technology or that concept or understanding come from? Is it, using sound? Is it using magnetism? Is it using... We don't know. And, you've run the risk of being called insane or woo-woo or whatever for talking about it, but I'm not sitting here saying I'm going to die on the hill that says it was some sort of incredible alien technology. But I'm also just willing to say it could be.
Well, I think...
Because I've looked at it through the perspective of standard science, physics and logistics and whatever I know, and whatever, and I know just from my YouTube habits, all the various machines that exist here in 2020 for cutting giant blocks of stone with blades and with wires and with this and with that. Well, that's unless machines of that size or bigger were around back then, I don't know.
Well, so do you know about the mortar? So there is mortar, some evidence of mortar in between the stones in the Great Pyramid.
Like as a glue or a leveler?
Like a glue.
Yeah.
Right? And they have... And the mortar is one of those things that we did a podcast on early on, because you look into it, it's one of those dead-end holes on Google. It's like... And basically all it is, and it's the same article that repeats itself, and it basically says that the mortar is of unknown composition and cannot be replicated now.
Right.
So,
which is like that element that Bob Lazar said was in that thing that he was trying to reverse engineer. They tried to artificially create it and it decomposed in under a second or something.
Yes, yeah, very, very similar. However, led myself down a rabbit hole. So MIT is melting granite using like lasers at 1300 degrees, or changing the molecular construction of the rock. Now, if you're melting it before you, I imagined, so there's talk in Egypt that their one tool was like a lathe, and every single tool was built from that lathe that would make everything perfect. Because the thing we're talking about the Great Pyramid, but we're not talking about the statues that are 300, 200 foot tall, of Anubis and stuff like that. Like the entirety, we're not even scratching the surface of any of that. However, I think it was some sort of sound, light, magnet, anti-gravity type stuff. Like, I can't see how else you do it. And I know that, and that sounds fantastical. However, You take the work of Bob Lazar, and the thing about anti-gravity, right? If you go back to the papers in the 50s in America, it's like anti-gravity this, anti-gravity that. It's going to be the next big thing. Da 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 da. And it's like 1958, it winks out of existence.
Yeah, yeah.
And you never hear
Around
about
about
it
the
again.
same time that psychedelic experimentation and all that stuff disappears out of existence. Oh, around about that era, I think.
Yeah, the same era. Yeah. That was more
Yeah.
into the 60s and stuff. However, you've got to that's I imagine like a laser level, basically. You know, the only thing I can think. So imagine. So we talk about how did they level the pad before they put the pyramid down. I can only think like an anti-gravity laser grader. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, the thing is that whole construct, like the two big ones are so perfect. You go, well, how do you get something that's like laser precise? Well, maybe you use a laser.
maybe you use a laser. Like if you've got a light beam that's perfectly straight. You know, like as long as it sits square. You know, how do you pick up a 50-ton lintel block that's actually carved on an angle, mind you? Let's not forget that.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not just a square block. It's got an arrow, angled each end, and pick it up. And it's 50 tons to 100 tons, and it's 20 meters long, and you slot 3 of them in the middle of a Great Pyramid. Like,
Yeah.
a crane would struggle to do that today. You know what I mean? That's the reality, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just trying to the crane, the arm, the chain, the hook, the whole lot. And before you even start to think about lifting it with a crane, you've got to somehow, would you lift it and put straps under it, or would you?
That's right. You've got to get slings under it, or you've got to, screw,
Screw something
eye
to it.
bolts into it. You know, and that's see, I built cranes for a while as well. Like that was part of one of the logistics job I had was building Franis in Brisbane. Here. So I saw cranes. You know, like I saw the biggest mobile crane in Australia, Big Ben, and
Yeah, right. And what can that lift? What can that lift at maximum capacity?
500 ton.
500 ton in one lift.
Yeah, you can get crawler cranes that can lift, I think 3,000 maybe. That sounds too much.
That sounds like a hell of a lot. I mean, that's bigger than the blocks at Bulbeck.
1,500 tons is, I think.
1,500, yeah.
Yeah, 1,500, I think. I think it's like an AC 3000 or something like that will lift 1,500 tons. However, that's static as well. Like every time, so when you go to move with a crane, the weight reduces. Where your jib is placed, like that is the crane perfectly still, straight up and down. It'll lift X amount. However, you're not crawling it up a pyramid. You're not putting it on top of a mountain. You know what I mean? You're not.
Yeah.
And again,
exactly.
there's no evidence of sling marks. There's no evidence of holes. There's nothing to suggest that. You know.
In the medieval, 500 to 1,000 years ago, one of the ways that you could lift the stone, you would carve a groove, like a little notched hole into the top, and you would lower in this little mechanism called a Lewis. And so you can sort of poke this thing in, and this hole tapers outwards on the inside. And you can put this thing in, and as you lift, the lifting mechanism itself locks into that hole, and you can lift a block like in that method. But again, we're only talking about blocks that might have been 100 kilos or 200 kilos or something like that.
Yeah.
And using old, we've all seen images of medieval construction sites and things like that, and we can understand that. And there's
early rope systems, early pulley systems. That's
right. Exactly right. But yeah, I mean, as you say, like I can understand what you're saying, because if you've got a static crane and you're lifting close to the tower, that makes it. It's like if you're holding 20 kilos down flat by your side, that's okay. You can probably hold it for a minute. But if you start to lift that out and out and out, trying to take the horizontal,
yeah, exactly.
Like
the further you go out, it reduces greatly. It's like and
I think the whole thing requires a fundamental shift away from mechanical thinking, and it almost needs you to look at gravity and address gravity differently. I think Bill Bryson in one of his books, Brief History of Everything or whatever. I've been dipping in and out of that for a few months, and he mentions at one point, he says, as powerful as gravity is, you have to remember. He says something like, as powerful as gravity is, you have to remember that it takes the entire planet Earth to hold a fallen autumn leaf on the ground.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so the gravitational force is not to be, underrated whatsoever. But if you can rethink what gravity is and how it works, and then maybe then weight and mass and all that sort of stuff ceases to apply in your limitations. But
Well, it's almost rethinking the entire baseline of physics. The push and pull, and that's obviously go back to Bob Lazar, commanded Fredo. Like that's what he was saying. Is like there was it just existed and it moved from one place to another, and it just
heat signature.
No heat signature, just went there. And those videos are on YouTube. I'd say all the listeners have probably already seen them, but if you haven't, look it up. It's next level stuff. And you have to suspend what we understand, and I think, the interesting, so we talk about masonry of stone and in Egypt, the interesting thing is that the deeper you dig in Egypt, the better quality it gets, the bigger the stones, the sharper the cuts, all of that. The deeper you dig into the sand,
and Peru
the better
as
it
well,
gets.
the Machu Picchu is the same as, when you go through photos of that, there's this incredible looking blockwork with this sort of really shitty, field stone and mud mortar stuff on top. I mean, the stonework that is definitely the work of the Incas in the last 1,000 years is perfectly fine and has held up and probably made some good houses, but it is weird that the shitty work's on top of this highly precision, George Jetson looking stonework.
Absolutely. And I think, what leads me to believe the laser and actually maybe affecting the molecular structure of the stone is the melted stones in South America. That's what, like they're actually joined together somehow. Like they look like they've been melted in place. So if you're passing a laser lathe or a laser leveler or however you want to do it over that, and you're using, and you understand that everything is just matter, and then therefore gravity doesn't exist, and you can manipulate whatever you want with certain frequencies of sound and light and vibration, which we already know that, like there's vibrations, you can get stone to a point where it starts to disintegrate, like that's, there's all that stuff. There's a lot of experiments been done on that. So,
well, you see those old photos those old videos of opera singers, hitting a high note and shattering a glass. So
yeah, exactly.
being able to manipulate solid matter through sound vibration is not off the table at all.
No, and the interesting thing about glass, and obviously growing up in Ballarat, that's some of the oldest buildings, is that you go to some of the old houses in Ballarat, glass is actually in a liquid state. You look at the window, and the window's thicker at the bottom than it is at the top because the glass has been there for 150 years. So even the glass in your house and all that sort of stuff, it's in a liquid state. You just can't see it.
Well, it's very slow, and if that's what's happening, because that's the same as I was talking about my mate Grubby's set-out table in the steel factory, and that moves with the increasing air temperature on a hot day.
Yeah.
That's steel, and that's dense, hardened steel. So you can imagine it through the fluctuations of a Ballarat winter and a Ballarat summer and a Ballarat winter and summer and a rinse. But of course, glass is going to change. It's going to be best at some times of the year and then contracting again.
Yeah. It's, and you think about it like that, and that everything is, depending on your perspective, everything is, like, there's the age-old one with physics. It's like, why doesn't the microphone and everything that's sitting on the table fall through the wood? Because if you get down to a molecular state, it's just one little bouncing thing bouncing around, and majority of it at any one point is actually empty space, So if you could match the vibration of a wall, you can put your hand through the wall.
No, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, that almost can lead you into the concept of, are we living in the simulation? We only believe these things are limited because that's the program. Like,
yeah, look, and that's very true. I think one of the other. So we went down a mechanical path, obviously in the Industrial Revolution. And there was an interesting a book that I read. I can't. It was about explorers and inventors, and basically we started to started to look after ourselves, our dwellings, like Europe was coming along in the, in the 1600s, and we sent all these explorers out into the world. And while they were gone, because it takes a long time to get around this big blue ball, while they were gone, we created the light bulb, and we did this and we did that, and we started our industrial revolution. And these explorers came back and said, whoa, 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 there's different stuff out there that you don't understand. We don't need that, we can do this. But because of our hubris, we're like, oh, we invented it, we're fine, don't you worry about that stuff, that's all primitive, you know what I mean? And, some of the stuff I'm discovering about Australia and the Indigenous people and the role that they played, they, as I say, like, they understood something that we don't understand. They understood a communication with the planet that we don't understand. They understand, there's things that we can't even fathom that they understood. And obviously these megalith builders had the same thing. Like, you can't, and the interesting thing about all this megalith stuff is that if you observe it, as our technology in our mechanical way advances, right, into electrical and LiDAR and all these things that we're being able to scan these megalithic sites, they're unlocking more and more secrets. So that begs the question, were they created as monuments with the secrets encoded in them, and we could only actually reveal the secrets when we got to a level of consciousness and understanding to receive them?
Yeah, look, I think I pay far more credence to that idea nowadays than ever before. It's almost, it's just that classic thing of like leaving a treasure map, and then you've got to go out on that journey, that adventure, that call to adventure to find that treasure. And it's almost like that's what these megaliths are in some ways. They're these clues left behind. I mean, the other thing about them that's so bizarre is, like, some of the time frames that are given to them. Like, I remember when someone first told me about, the Inca and Machu Picchu and that sort of stuff, and said, oh yeah, the Inca were around for about 400 or 500 years before the Spanish got there. And I did have to sort of pause for a second. I thought, hang on, I've seen all these photos of all these places. I don't think you could get that done in that time.
No, that's right. Yeah, what are they up to? But have you seen the recent stuff out of South America, mate, with the LiDAR, that they estimate that, once upon a time they thought maybe 4 million people resided in South America?
Yeah, maybe 20 million or something instead, isn't it?
No, it's like 50 or 60, mate. They've found, using LiDAR penetrating the jungle, they've found highways that run for 30 kilometres dead straight.
Yeah, right.
Between settlements. They've found other satellite cities. They've found all this stuff because it's the laser that it's like light penetrating radar, so it sees through the foliage and gives you what's underneath. And like, it's something like it's going to take them 100 years just to sift through the data. However, what they have found is highways that run for 30 km, satellite cities all over South America. Yeah. Like 60,
I remember
70
Hancock
million,
spoke about that. Hancock spoke about that. And did you have a look? Did you read his book America Before?
Yes, mate. Yeah. And it's unbelievable. Like, and however, America is obviously the where the cataclysm happened. However, the echoes around the globe, that if you actually pay attention, as I say, there's a pattern developing, and what I see is inside this pattern there's a set of symbols and there's a set of knowledge that echoes around the globe that is obviously very important. It wouldn't have happened and it wouldn't be echoed around the globe through every single culture, every single religion has the same story, every culture. It wouldn't continually echo around the globe if it wasn't important. And we just, our hubris writes it off as just myth and legend. I don't think it was. They're trying to tell us something,
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I think when I started to look into the flood myths, there's something, it's estimated that there's about 300 flood myths all over the world.
Yeah.
Or flood stories.
Yeah.
But I even remember a few years ago, even David Attenborough had a thing where he was up north of northern Queensland, and there was a mob up there, and they were doing a dance to explain when the water came in over the old Great Barrier Reef to form the new Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah.
That's a songline story, and I mean I can't remember the timing of it, but if I went back and found that, and they said, 12,000, 13,000, 14,000 years ago, or whatever, you go go, okay, well there you go. That's that meltwater pulse from the Younger Dryas impact.
Yeah. Well, it's and that's what you talk about people like, all this stuff. If someone pulls my string, I don't shut up for an hour and a half. However, one of the things I say is like the flood myth thing. It's like I'd say the sea level rising 400 feet in a matter of weeks across the planet. I'd say that's probably a pretty good flood. I'd say
it's decent, isn't it?
Yeah, covering 10 million square kilometres. There's now underwater that wasn't underwater back then. And not to mention the volcanoes and the wildfires and the crustal shift and all the stuff. We can't even fathom that, And,
can't fathom that.
And all these sites that we keep finding that have been buried on purpose around that time. It's like, okay, these things. I mean, you even talk about Göbekli Tepe. That's another whole different story.
I was just going to say, have you seen that? There's an image that it's sort of easy to find. If you just Google,
Pillar 43.
We'll go Göbekli Tepe and Aboriginal symbol, and there's this Aboriginal guy Australian Aboriginal guy standing there with this symbol. I think it's on his abdomen, and the exact same symbol is carved into one of the pillars of Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, there's there's the handbag as well. The handbags found all over the planet. There's a set of these symbols, mate, that had meaning that we don't quite fathom what it is. And I do, along with the quest for self, that's why there's two things that this podcast is dedicated to, as well as having a bit of a laugh and having a good time.
Most important.
Quest for self and trying to understand this stuff, man, because it's like they obviously knew something that we don't know, and something happened, and I think they could do stuff that we can't do, and they built it in stone to remind us, because no matter what happened, you know yourself, mate, that you wanted something to last. What do? You build it in stone. It's not going anywhere. You talk about those fire pits and some of the stuff you've done for people, even on the smaller scale. You go back in 100 years, mate, that fireplace is still going to be there with those 600 kilo blocks.
Well, that's what I thought. I mean, doing that job at the time, I remember thinking that I could walk away. I could walk away from that job. Everyone could walk away from that property for 1,000 years, and those 5 blocks will well and truly still be there. All the timber of the house, the masonry of the house, all that sort of stuff will be over. Yeah,
it's all gone, mate. But he's saying 2,000 years from now, someone's going to wander onto that property. There's going to be no house, no nothing, but there'll be these 5 blocks and some charred remains in them.
Yeah, that's it, exactly.
So they obviously, So I mean, I think we're coming.
It's been great to chat about this from both your perspective in logistics. How do you make these things move from one place to the next?
Yeah.
And my perspective, how do you actually make the things that you want to move from one place to the next? And it's kind of cool. We could probably go another 5 hours. I mean, we probably shouldn't, because we've both probably got beds to get to. But
yeah, we do, mate. Well, I think we're coming to the end of it. As I say, this is our first one. It won't be our last one, mate. However, I mean, do you have any more thoughts on how they did it? I mean, I suppose it seems to be we're very similar in our thought processes and patterns, and that we're looking at a technology that we don't understand, and therefore we have to suspend our belief on everything that we know. I think.
Well, I kind of put all of this into. I have to file it under the JFK assassination thing, which is that I don't believe the official story.
Yeah.
And I'm yet to figure out what the real story is. But I think all of us are yet to figure out what the real story is.
But I think, as I say, if you're spreading the word down there in Victoria, mate, I'm spreading the word up here, and this humble little indie podcast is reaching around the globe as well.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It's these things, as long as the discussion is being had, if someone listens to this and then goes and talks to their mate, as you say, it's the ripple effect, man. One person might talk to someone else about this, and then by the end of the week, look, the reality is, I'll cut this and sort it out tomorrow, and by this time next week, potentially hundreds of people have listened to it, and if they talk to one person and there's 1,000, they talk to one person, and as long as the discussion keeps going, then and we all understand it, we can all get along, we can all find that common ground, to go back to what we were talking about earlier. And if that common ground is two things, the quest for self and trying to understand where we actually come from, because I don't think we do. As I'm sure you quote we're a species with amnesia line to people as well.
All the time.
Because that's what it is. And if we work together to try and figure it out, that's all we can do, mate. Well, as it's your first podcast, I'll give you the final word, mate. What's your final thoughts and takeaway for this one?
Oh, Jesus. Any final thoughts? Jesus, that's a dangerous question. That's another hour. I wanted to just say thanks to you. Look, I've been really enjoying, your social media presence, and I'll confess it was only very recently I worked out that you were doing a podcast on the side as well as the content you put up. And it's very good because you're not coming out as any kind of a high-standing authority on this. You're just asking people to ask questions, to look at these things. And I think the fact that you couple it up with a sense of self-repair, self-realisation, you're asking tough questions about, who built the pyramids. At the same time, you're asking tough questions about how to rebuild yourself or create the ideal version of who you are.
Yeah.
There's that great, whenever you get on an aeroplane, there's that little thing that says, in an emergency, put your oxygen mask on before you help others. And that's kind of a little bit of a metaphor that one of my mates uses. He always says, it's not a selfish thing to set yourself up to be a good person, because, you're only going to be able to help others through doing that first.
Definitely, mate. Definitely. And look, the thing is that, and obviously now we've been texting, you talk to me not face to face, but we're talking on the phone. You'd know that I practice what I preach. Whatever you hear on my social media is exactly what I tell you face to face. And
Beautiful.
Getting up every day and trying to practice what you preach is not easy. However, the benefits far outweigh the challenges most of the time.
Exactly. And if it was easy, we'd all be doing it.
Exactly. And you're right, mate. I do not. The only thing I profess, the only thing I do know is that I know nothing. So therefore, I don't know nothing. However, and there's the recirculating circle.
That's perfect.
Yeah. Well, mate, thank you very much. I don't even know how long that went for, but that was awesome. And I look forward to our next chat. And yeah, I appreciate your time, mate. And when you start your podcast, don't you worry, the favour will come straight back. I'd be more than happy to come on and be a guest.
Brother.
We'll go from there, mate. We'll look after yourself, mate. Thanks very much. And
mate. Thanks very much, Trip, and love you. That's fantastic.
All right, mate. We'll talk soon, eh?
Go well. Cheers, bud.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Have I burned out? Have I blackened the ground? Will I fight back, find my strength again? Days have been gold, tomorrow losing their shine. Will I give up? I doubt it. I never turn to the bottle to wash away the demons in my mind. I stood up and knocked them down. Though I had a struggle till I seen the colored eyes of the kind. Now they have built me up. I've always had the answer. I'm not one to self-destruct. There's too many smiles that I love. And when my world comes crashing down, I get right back up. I take the brunt, I walk out of the road. Have I burned out? Have I blackened the ground? Will I fight back, find my strength again? Days have been gold, but tomorrow losing burn out? Have I blackened the ground? Will I fight back, find my strength again? Days have been gold, but tomorrow losing their shine. Will I give up? I doubt it. Will I give up? I doubt it. Will I give it all away? No way.